ahead, Your Worship.
Good evening, and welcome to the regular session of council. It is June the 15th, 2023, and I will call this meeting to order at 6:18 p.m. We have a motion before us that in accordance with section 4.3 of the bylaw number 2023-021, the council of the corporation of the municipality of Bayham permits the June 15th, 2023 regular meeting of council to commence at 6:18 p.m. Do I have a mover and seconder? Deputy Mayor Weisler and Councillor Chilcott will second. All in favor? And we're carried. I would remind members of all disclosures of pecuniary interest and general nature thereof. Seeing none noted. Review of items not listed on the agenda.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Well, we have one item to note that is being pulled from the agenda. That's item 6A, delegation from Jacob Hanlon regarding food cycle science. It was pulled at the request of the delegate and will be moved to the July 20th, 2023 meeting.
All right, thank you. Section 4, announcements. Councillor Chilcott.
Thank you. I just wanted to announce that in Stratfordville, opening on Monday, June 19th, is a nurse practitioner community outreach clinic in the Stratfordville Plaza. It runs 2 days a week, and it's for anyone who doesn't currently have a doctor. So it is from, let's see, Mondays and Wednesdays, excluding holidays, from 9 a.m. till 4 p.m. It's closed from noon till 1 p.m. for lunch. So that's exciting news for people that don't have doctors.
Oh, it's extremely exciting.
Yeah.
Glad to hear that. Any other announcements? I'll be going. I don't have a dog. Oh, there you go. Deputy Mayor.
Yes, thank you through you, Mr. Mayor. Just a quick update for council, just to let you know that this past week I partnered with Earl Shea and him and I did a presentation with the public school grade 8 graduating class, and we talked about local governance and geography of Bayham. It was very well received, and I do have a copy of that presentation if any of council would like to see it. Great.
Perfect, thank you. Anything else? Just to announce that today, June the 15th, is Elder Abuse Awareness Day. So anyone who's wearing purple and or red, good for you. And promote this day as a reminder to diminish or even let's get rid of elder abuse across the community. Section 5, moving on with presentations. First, we have Watson and Associates regarding development charges kickoff presentation. Who we got?
Yeah, good evening, members of council, members of the public. Sorry, a little bit of a height.
Thank you for joining us. Sorry to jump in. Did you want me to share the screen for you, or?
Oh, happy enough to do so. I wasn't sure whether you required me to have my laptop with me or not, but I have both just in case.
I can do that as well, so the
Okay.
people at home can follow along. And just a reminder to, yeah, please use the microphone. You say next.
Perfect, thank you. Right. Well, good evening, members of council, your worship, and members of the public. My name is Byron Tan. I am a manager at Watson and Associates Economists Limited. I'm here today to provide you a presentation and a kickoff meeting for the development charge background study. We've been engaging with staff, to undertake a review of a municipal-wide development charge study. This is coming, subsequent to your water and wastewater development charge study that was just passed in 2022. So tonight we're here just to provide you a little bit of an overview for those that are unfamiliar with development charges, and to provide you with, some of the different municipal-wide services that could be considered as part of this review. So it is a little bit of an informal presentation. So if there are any questions, please feel free to ask. However, I do find that sometimes when questions are asked, it's a good segue into the next slide. So Again, feel free to ask any questions, but perhaps it may be answered subsequent to. So again, just a quick introduction. Like I said, my name is Byron Tan. Today we'll go through the legislative changes from the development charges. Most recently, back in October 25th, 2022, Bill 23 was introduced, and I'm sure most of you know what that is. It was a bill that introduced a number of changes to, about 10 different pieces of legislation. And then most notably are your development charges, community benefits, and the Planning Act. So I'll go through a little bit of the changes from there, along with a brief overview of the DCs. And then we'll go through your current rates, exemptions, some of the methodologies that we would use as part of the study. And then from there, discuss the timelines and again, next steps. And I have the questions there, but if there's any questions, please let me know. Next slide. So the purpose of development charges, they are meant to recover capital costs, growth-related capital costs related to residential and non-residential growth within a municipality. Development charges are not mandatory. Prior to last year, you did not have a development charge. However, they are used to provide revenues and recoveries from growth-related developments to help fund in capital infrastructure. And the key word there is capital only. So we can't fund salaries, operating, anything like that. It is only meant for new infrastructure. And one of the key things as well is keyword also is new. So we do not fund anything with respect to replacement or asset management, unless, of course, again, there is always that, that gray line if it's providing an enhancement. And I'll go through this later on, but essentially, if you're replacing, a fire truck with a larger fire truck, chances are you're expanding the capacity of the tank to be able to provide more fire protection. So even though you're replacing, you're enhancing. So there is a DC component to it. These costs are typically, what you would receive in addition to any cost that you would require a local subdivision to provide you. So, for example, if there's a local subdivision that's to be built, they would provide you with internal roads, sewers, water mains, sidewalks, which at one point in time you will then eventually assume. But all the costs are the local developers. So these development charges are above and beyond what those revenue recoveries would be. And as I mentioned, municipalities are empowered to have DCs. It's not mandatory. Next slide. So just to go over some of the legislative changes from the DCA. Next slide. So a little bit of history walking down memory lane. Development charges are not new. They've actually been around since really the early 50s in the form of lot levies under the Planning Act. From there, it has evolved into its own act, the Development Charge Act in 1989, which allowed you to have, a plethora of recoveries, in different types of capital, different types of services. There was really no framework. It was just, if it's a capital, you couldn't recover for it. Fast forward to 1997, that's what we're seeing today as the latest iteration of the Development Charge Act. So that outlined the framework of what services couldn't be recovered for. Again, such as town hall or, administrative centers, stuff like that, computers, although I'll get that in a minute because computers have changed over the years than what it was, 30 years ago. So, with that being said, we're looking at the 1997 Act as of today. And from that time, there have been multiple bills that have been passed that have amended the 1997 Act. And you can see those on the right-hand side of the presentation, starting from, 2016, Bill 73, which really just, introduced a lot of different definitions. It required that the development charge be a little bit more transparent, and you had to release a study a minimum of 60 days before you can consider a bylaw. Prior to that, you basically release a study, 2 weeks later, pass a bylaw, no one says anything, it flies under the radar. So now it's, very clear that there is a little bit of transparency there. And then it notes also a whole bunch of different pamphlet requirements, making sure you inform the public, etc. And then we get to some of the more recent ones starting in 2019. As you can see there, it goes from Bill 108, 138, etc., all the way to 23. And I'll touch upon that upon the next slide. So again, I already mentioned Bill 73, and that's why I gave it a little bit more detail. But since the implementation of your 2022 DC study, there have been, again, Bill 23. Bill 23 was the main bill that just recently been released. But just to give everyone a refresher for all the other ones, Bill 108, so that provided a timing of payment provision So essentially, if I were to come in and pull a building permit and I am either a rental housing or institutional, I'll skip non-for-profit for now. You would be able to pay your DCs, say over 5 years. So at the time of building permit, I pay my first installment and I get 5 more installments. So it just provided for cash flow opportunities for development, those types of developments. We were allowed to freeze the DC rate. There are allowed to freeze the DC rates at the time of site plan or zoning bylaw amendment. So what that means is if I were to come in as a developer and I either had a site plan or zoning application and it's been accepted by the municipality, then whatever the rates are at that time are frozen for 2 years. So that allows developers to at least, provide for their pro formas, be able to lock in a rate without, unexpected jumps, whether through indexing or, maybe from one bylaw to the other, you're updating and the charge goes up. So they're able to at least lock in a rate for 2 years. But as a municipality, you also have costs that you have to bear. So if they're locking in rates, but you have to build, infrastructure now, you may have to take out a loan, pay interest costs. So you are allowed to, include interest on top of that frozen rate. And again, back in 2019, you were able to set that rate. Fast forward to today, you're no longer allowed to set that rate. It is now prescribed to you, which I'll touch upon in a bit. So the last point here with the non-profit housing, the reason I skipped it was that is no longer eligible for DCs. So they are fully exempt as of Bill 23. Historically, from that 2019 bill, they would be allowed to pay over 21 installments, so 20 years. So, obviously that provided a little bit of concern for some municipalities because for someone to track an application over 20 years for payments every year may be a little bit difficult. So that's with Bill 108. Bill 138, all it did was just simply remove installment payments from commercial and industrial. So that was part of Bill 108, but that's been removed. And then Bill 197 came in, and that was a little bit more significant because it actually outlined the list of eligible services that could be included as part of a development charge study. So historically in 1997, it told you what you couldn't include. Now this is telling you what you can include. A little bit of a change of words, but having, exclusionary versus inclusionary really, frames what you can, have in the sandbox essentially. So I'll provide you with that list shortly in a forward slide. And then there's some other items as well that we touched upon during the 2022 DC study, where they have these items called classes of service. What that just means is, if you had, let's say, public works, public works could be related to roads, could be related to water or wastewater. Well, we can say public works is its own service with subsets of services within it. That's all it just means of grouping of municipal servicing. And then the removal of the 10% mandatory deduction and the time horizon. So what that means is historically in 1997, when you were doing the development charge calculations, at the end of the day, for any soft services such as parks and recreation, library, essentially your non-infrastructure services, even though you could collect 100% of the costs, the province wanted to make sure municipalities had skin in the game. So at the end of the day, they removed 10% from the top. So if you were eligible to collect $1 million for, a new recreation center, well, the most you can get is 900,000. So that's now been removed. So now you are able to collect 100% of whatever you're calculating. Bill 213, again, that's just a minor change, but essentially if you did have a university within the municipality, it would be exempt from development charges if there was any development on those lands. And then all of this is all included as part of your current development charge bylaw. And then Bill 109 is just annual reporting requirements. So your treasurer will have to just add a little bit more words when it comes to submissions to the province at the end of the year. So I just note that, again, we did complete the development charge study in 2022 for water and wastewater. However, now, since that time, Bill 23 has been released and passed. And that's what we'll be going over in the next few slides, which is a little bit more impactful right now for the municipality. So just as an overview, again, all the slides are here for your reference to read later, but, I'll try to go through as much as I can without, going into too much detail unless I'm asked. But essentially, with Bill 23, it was a very quick act. The bill was passed on October 25th, first passed on October 25th, 2022. And that was the first time it was read. And within a month and 3 days, it received royal assent. So very quick. They did not really want too many, comments. The comment period was very short. It was about 2.5 to 3 weeks. And even then they were providing comments after royal assent as well, which I don't see why, but anyways, November 28th was the drop dead date. So this bill, again, as I mentioned, affected a number of pieces of legislation, most notably the Development Charge Act and the Planning Act for you. Through Bill 23, unfortunately, there are a lot of changes that are now going to be reducing the ability for municipalities to collect revenues. And I'll go through that in the next slides because it is a reduction across the board. Next. So just to frame it, I'll start off at the top and in the orange. And these are items that are currently, again, part of Bill 23, but they're not currently enforced yet because the minister and the province have not released the bulletins to provide the definitions to support these exemptions. But once they do, they will come into effect. So the first ones there are affordable rental and affordable owned units. So what that means is if you have any developments that meet this criteria of affordable units, whether it's rented or owned, and it meets 80% of it's about 80% or less of the average market value of its peers, as defined by this bulletin, then they would be exempt from development charges. So basically, if you had something, a development, let's say in Stratfordville, but then they're using market values, let's say in Port Burwell, where it's, nice by the lake. Well, unfortunately, if everything in Stratfordville is at least 80% or less of the value in that municipality, and that's your average, then potentially everything in one area could be exempt. So we're not sure how this bulletin is going to be framed yet, but it is something that we are concerned about because, again, most municipalities have different quadrants or, different areas that have different values. So is it going to be an average? Is it going to be by area? We're not sure yet. And I'm being optimistic and looking at it from a municipality standpoint. We're not sure if it's going to be by region or by area, right? What if your average is, the whole of the county? Again, we're not sure how this is going to proceed. And then attainable units, again, so these are similar but different than the affordable units. They will be defined within the bulletin, so we're still waiting for that. But at minimum, it has mentioned in the act that these are properties that are to be sold at arm's length from the seller. So again, we're waiting to see what the definition holds on how that's going to proceed. But that's another exemption that you would have to provide the moment it becomes in effect. However, with these exemptions, you are allowed to undertake a agreement with these developments over a period of 25 years. So that allows you to go back, once a year or however frequent or periodic you'd like to see whether these units still meet this criteria. If they don't meet the criteria, well, they're assuming to be affordable for the first few years, and then they sell for profit, 5-6 years down the road, then you can actually, through this agreement, go back and charge them a DC because they're now not fulfilling their affordable or attainable definition that they were once supposed to be. Again, it's a good way to, to help yourselves, but at the same time, those agreements would have to be drafted in a way that it's a little bit more, easier to administer. And again, over 25 years, that makes it a little bit difficult. The stuff at the bottom in the green, so these are in force already. So the inclusionary zoning, I'm not sure whether that affects you or not. However, these are really with respect to affordable housing units within inclusionary zoning areas. And that's typically for the most part in the GTA, anywhere with GO transit stations or really transit-oriented hubs. So, until you reach that point, this exclusion would most likely not affect you. The nonprofit housing, however, again, so that one is now in effect. So any non-for-profit housing that you do receive as an application or development through the building permits, as they come through, they would be exempt from DCs. And then there's this additional residential unit exemption. So essentially, as I'm building a new house, or if I'm building if I'm intensifying an existing home, I'm now allowed to add up to 3 units to that existing unit, as long as I don't more than double the size of the home and not pay a DC. So for example, if I'm building a brand new home and then as I'm building, I'd like to apply to add 2 apartments. Well, although I'm adding 2 additional units to my brand new home, those units don't pay a DC because they are, again, considered an additional residential unit. Next slide. And then there's some DC discounts. So if you do have any applications that come in that are rental housing, and it has to be a minimum of 10 units that are fully rental. So the whole building has to be considered a rental unit. They get a discount, and so not a full exemption, but a discount on your DC based on the number of units in the apartment. So for example, the 15% discount would go to 1-bedroom and studio apartments. 2 bedrooms would receive a 20% discount, and then the 3 bedrooms or more would receive a 25%. So the more bedrooms you provide in a rental housing, the larger your DC discount. And then finally, for the revenue reductions, if you did have any housing, which you don't, and from a DC perspective, they would have been now ineligible for DC collection, which is a little bit weird because, if Bill 23 was meant to expand on housing and have housing built faster, well, they only want to make sure that, municipalities don't become, don't play into the housing game as well. So it was a little bit odd there that, housing as a DC eligible service was removed. The capital cost amendments, so anything with respect to studies, have been removed from capital recovery. So for example, if you had, let's say, an official plan or a transportation master plan, water, wastewater master plan, those used to be DC eligible for recovery. Now those type of studies have been removed. And then with land, they say that land will be removed, but it hasn't been prescribed yet. So while it hasn't been prescribed, we're still moving ahead and recovering for land until we're told not to. And then another kicker is the mandatory phase-in of the charge. So whatever charge you do decide to implement, at the first year, you have to phase it in over a 5-year period. So let's assume that you put together a $10,000 charge. Then the first year you can only collect $8,000. And then the following year after that, then it can go to $8,500, $9,095. And then in year 5, you can go to the full $10,000. Now, that's just with respect to phasing. You're still allowed to index your charges every year. So, in the following year, you're not going to be at 8,500. You'll be 8,500 plus whatever the index is, because you are allowed to increase the charge with inflation every year. And then the historical service standards, again, we'll talk about this later, but you're now allowed to look at it. You don't have to look at it from a 10-year horizon. You look at it from a 15-year. And again, this is more mechanical in calculations. And for some municipalities, maybe perhaps like yourselves, it's actually beneficial. But for others that are high growth, and I'll show you in a moment, high growth municipalities actually get penalized with the service standards on how much you can collect for DCs, because you're growing faster than you're building infrastructure, and therefore your per capita amounts start to drop. Your service standard starts to drop. So I'll go over that in a slide. Next. So a couple of things with the administrative side. As I mentioned earlier, historically you were allowed to set your interest rates when it came to those rate freezes over 2 years. Now the maximum interest rate for the installments and rate freeze are set at whatever the average of the large banks are, plus 1%. So we actually do track this at at Watson. So if you ever require it, we're more than happy to send it. But it's whatever the prime rate is plus 1 the period prior. So the prior quarter, and there is a time frame between them. So that's when you would establish the interest rate. When it comes to when you start collecting money on an annual basis, you must allocate at least 60% of the reserve funds for water, wastewater, and roads. So it doesn't mean you have to spend it, but if you were to, let's say, collect $100,000 for road projects in 1 year from DCs, then at minimum that first year, you must state within your treasurer statements of that 100, where does the $60,000 go? Is it going to go to project A, B, C? And again, it doesn't have to be spent, but you just have to make sure that you're putting it away so that, we know that those funds will be utilized for a future project.
So just to clarify,
Yes,
they can be reserved and not spent.
correct. It's just spend or allocate.
Can
Those
they
are the
be
words.
spent Or reserved outside of what they were collected for. For example, if it was a wastewater fund. Does it have to be dumped into a wastewater reserve? Or can it be allocated to a road reserve?
Great question. Your worship, when reserves and DCs are collected, they must be within the service that they are collected in. And then for the DC bylaw, it used to be 5 years for the expiry date. Now they're allowed to go 10 years. So that's another administrative change as well. Next slide. And again. So just to provide a bit of an overview, again, the relationship between, having to service new users and, what comes with that is new infrastructure. So that's the top, part of this triangle here. As you're getting new users and new infrastructure that you need to provide services to them, where does that money come from? So at the end of the day, as I mentioned, the development charges are there. They're not mandatory. However, if you don't have them and you have to build new infrastructure, then there's no magic to it. It either comes from taxes, rates, or your current reserves. You could apply for grant funding, but as we know, grant funding is a little bit few and far in between these days. So a lot of this here is, again, it's just another revenue stream to help, provide for those servicing of the new users and infrastructure. Next slide. So with the methodology, again, I'll touch upon this briefly. It's a little bit, it's quite a bit. There's over 80 plus, clauses and subclauses within the Development Charge Act. So we try to, summarize this into 6 bullets. But essentially, the main goal is to identify the amount, type, and location of growth. So we would go through a demographic exercise, work with the municipality to identify where within the municipality are you growing. And then from there, we identify the servicing needs to accommodate that growth. So if you have a whole bunch of subdivisions, let's say in the south, well, now do we need roads? Do we need parks and recreation? Do we need water and wastewater mains, et cetera? Number 3 then says, then we identify the capital costs to provide services to meet those needs. So while number 2 and number 3 sound interchangeable, number 2 says, I need parks and rec. Number 3 says, well, what kind of parks and rec would you like? Would you like, an arena? Would you like a pool? Would you like that artificial turf? So to us, it's you providing a capital need, but what capital do you select? This is for staff and council to consider. To us, all we care about is you're providing parks and recreation. And then from there, once you identify those capital needs, we do have to make a number of deductions. So first off is if there's any grants, subsidies, or other contributions. If you're getting anything from the province, the feds, developers, or even other external individuals that we would have to deduct those funds. Anything, and then there's a benefit to existing development. So for example, you have an arena right now, and it made more sense to, let's say, replace that arena, tear it down, and build one that's double the size, so that can service a larger area. Well, you already had the one arena at, say, 20,000 square feet, and you want to go to 40,000. That first 20,000 is a replacement because you already had one. So that's the benefit to the existing community. That next 20,000 would be our incremental growth that we can recover development charges for. And then there's this amount in excess of the 15-year historical service standard calculation. I'll touch upon that in the next slide, but essentially there's a mathematical calculation we have to do where whatever you provided in the last 15 years can be no higher than the average of what you want to provide into the future. Okay, and I'll show you that in a second. And then, like I said, DC reserve funds. So as you're moving from one bylaw to the other, if you do have any reserve funds in the bank, then we must attribute that as a deduction because you've already collected that money, right? So we're not just going to add on to it. You have to apply it as if it's going to be towards the capital projects. And then once you get to that net calculation, then you have to divide that between the residential and non-residential benefit. And we typically look at this from a population to employment standpoint. So, if you have 9,000 people growing and another 1,000 employees, then it's about a 90-10 split, right? So again, that's a very simple example, but we would have to go through that type of analysis. And then at the end of the day, once we divide it between the two, res and non-res, divide it by the cost allocated to both, and there's your DC. Next slide. I'm not going to touch upon this slide. This is more for your information, but that's basically taking the methodology from the previous slide and just kind of breaking it down into those further deductions and how we would separate out the costs. Next slide. So what you're seeing here, these are now the services, that were identified from Bill 197 as amended by Bill 23. So as you can see right now, there's about 20 services. It really is 21 because the 21st one would be if a minister were to prescribe the service, but he hasn't. So really it's just these 20. As you can see, the ones that are highlighted in teal are the ones you're currently providing a development charge, rate for, which is water and wastewater. And then today we'll consider a number of these, which I'll touch upon in about 5 or 10 slides forward. But these are obviously for your for your information if you have any questions. Next. Oh, there we go. So the potential municipal-wide DCs as we're going through this process, based on your FIR data, and again, we will chat with staff and through council's direction, however you want to proceed. But at minimum, we could take a look at the following. So we could look at services related to highway, which is your roads and public works, fire protection, police services, if you'd like to include that, parks and recreation. So this is both your indoor and outdoor recreation combined, library services, and waste diversion if you so choose. Okay, so at minimum, these are this type of services that we could examine for this development charge process. Next slide. So just to touch upon with the service standards. So as I said, although, we can take a look at the capital, plug it in and see what the charge will be, we are subject to a service standard ceiling. And what this is a development charge calculation, strictly mathematical, that looks at the average that you have provided over the last 15 years. So we look at two things called quantity and quantity, and it's a backward looking analysis that's not required for water, wastewater, stormwater, or transit. Water, wastewater, and stormwater have their own pieces of legislation. So, it's really what you need to provide for water and wastewater treatment or stormwater drainage. Whatever you need, that's what you put within the capital. In terms of transit, it's a forward-looking analysis because if you were to do a backwards-looking, but you never had transit before, it'd always be zero. So if that is something that you're looking forward in the future, there's a bunch of items that need to be considered, with, ridership, items like that. So for the meantime, we'll just take a look at the historical 15 years. Next slide. So I apologize for the size here. I hope it's bigger on your screens, but this is essentially what we would work with the municipal staff. So for every single service that you saw on there, roads, police, fire, parks and rec, whoever, we would have to fill in these service standard sheets. And just starting from the left to right, I know, and I apologize for the individuals in the audience, a little bit hard to see, but the left-hand side is the description. So this example here is public works facilities. So we would have to list all of your public works facilities. Simple enough. However, now the tricky thing to request from staff is what is the square footage of each one over a 15-year period. And the reason we say that is because we need to track when those buildings were either demolished or expanded upon, or as you've added to your inventory. So that's why we look at it from each year, from 2008, 2009, all the way to 2022. And then from there, we get a subtotal at the bottom. So that's your quantity. That's the number of facilities and the number of square foot and the square footage. We do the same thing for vehicles, equipment, etc. Then what we do is we allocate a value to it. So the second last column you'll see is a value, a building value per square foot. So if you had to build these today in 2023 dollars using today's building code, I know some of these may have been built, let's say in the 70s, 80s, but if you had to build it like for like today with the added accessibility and building code, how much would it be per square foot? From there, we then add on anything with respect to land. So you can't build a building unless you had land sitting on it. So we would identify the number of acres that these facilities sit on. And we would also then include any site works. So, landscaping, parking, furniture, fixtures, and equipment, really to fully encompass a building. And the right-hand side is your true cost per square foot on a per dollar basis. So we take that information, multiply it by every single year, and if we go to the next slide, then you get a dollar value, per year. And at the end of the day, based on this example, we're just under $11 million. Again, this is just an example. We'll have to go through this with the municipality, but you can see starting from 2008, there was about $8.1 million of building replacement costs. Now we've moved up to 10.9, which shows that in this example, it's they've built. However, if you go down the list here, under the total line, you'll see it says population. So you see how we capture a population each and every year. So this is how we determine your per capita. So now we divide that dollar amount, the replacement costs, by the population to get a per capita standard. And when we do that for all 15 years, we must average it. And the average here is $96. Well, if you started in 2008, the per capita was just under $80. It climbed all the way up to 106 in 2013 because they built that new garage in Sandome. And then all of a sudden it started dwindling down because you didn't build anything. So that's where I say, if you're a high growth municipality, your service standard will come down over time if you're not building anything. So in this example, we go to $96. So that's the magic number there. If we go back to the slide prior, we take that $96, the average over 15 years, and multiply it by the forecast population. So you'll see that on the bottom left-hand side of this table. So the bottom left-hand side of the table says, over a 20-year period, if this example municipality was going to grow by 35,000 people, we would then multiply it by that $96 per capita. So at the end of the day, we have $3.4 million. So from a DC perspective, I can now fund a public works facility up to 3.4 million for this study. And we do this exact same examination for vehicles, equipment, and all of your other services. Yes.
Where are the numbers on your population line under the total? Where's that 101,540 come from?
So these are just examples. So this is I'd say it's a fictional municipality, but I'm assuming that this may have been one of the booming ones from the GTA a while back.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
You're wrong.
Yeah. So anyways, we do the same type of work for yourselves. And then again, we would have an adjusted forecast, whether it's, 2,000, 3,000 people, whatever the case is. And then it's over a period of time that, what staff would deem, accessible when it comes to the information. So we may be going out to 2041. We could go out to 2051. It all depends on the comfort level of staff and your planning department. And that's it. Next slide. So now that we have the gory details out of the way on the service standard ceiling, now we can get into the things that council and staff like, which is the capital costs. What can we recover for? So the capital costs, I just want to go through the definitions briefly, but we can, as of right now, we can still acquire land or have an interest in land and improve land. So again, until the minister says otherwise, if you have any land that you have to purchase in order to, construct a facility, we can still include that in the DC. Improve land, that's really for parkland, because since you do get parkland dedication or you're able to get cash in lieu, you're allowed to use DCs to improve the land. So once you actually get the parkland or purchase it from the dedication side, then you can use development charges, let's say to, build a park or, put in trails, fields, sod, whatever the case may be. You're allowed to acquire, lease, or construct and improve buildings, facilities, and structures. So as I said, whether you build it or you get a lease, from another third party, we can include it in the development charges. Equipment and rolling stock, as I said, vehicles, equipment of significant values, and I'll mention that in the next slide. If you do have a lease, let's say you have a contract with another entity that does some of your service providing, we can include the capital component of those leases if they're, growth related. Circulation materials for libraries, libraries don't function well unless there's books or electronic materials, so we can include that as a recovery. And then interest on borrowed monies as well. So if you did have a major project that you had to undertake financing, we can include the financing costs as well for development charges. So then that way we'll be able to pay that off through development charge monies. As I mentioned, you can use any planning horizon, except for transit. So again, depends on your OPs or any of your master plans, but we can go 10-year, 20 years, so on. And as I already mentioned, you have to reduce these with grants, subsidies, and other contributions. And just that last bullet there, these costs may also include incurred or proposed to be incurred by the municipality or others. So if you have any costs, obviously, that haven't been, passed as part of your budget yet, it is still going to be proposed to be incurred in the future. So it doesn't have to be within your budget. We can include it in the DC because at the end of the day, on an annual basis, you're provided with the capital budget that you must approve anyways. The DC is just meant to capture the best information possible to generate a charge for you to collect for future. The second portion there of the proposed to be incurred by others on your behalf is if you have any partnerships, maybe with another municipality or a local board where you split services, then any components that you may pay towards them because they are the ones that are in charge of that service, we can also use as part of the DC. So, if you have, let's say, joint fires, but, they want to build a fire training facility next door. Well, if you have a cost to it, we can include that because it's your portion of their capital costs. Okay, next slide. Some limitations, capital costs may not include parkland. As I mentioned, you have the Planning Act for that. So we can't use dedication. We can't collect for dedication or any parkland acquisition. Vehicles and equipment must meet a useful life of 7 years or longer. So, we don't want anything, that's, high turnover or, hammers or anything like that. It has to be at least of a significant value and, has that 7-year, trigger. Computer equipment that's not integral to the delivery of the service. So historically, computer equipment, a little bit different than what it is now. Back then, it was more so, utilized for whether it's admin or more for recreational purposes. Now everything's computerized. So with that being said, if the equipment requires the computer to run it, we're not going to exclude that. Right. However, if it's more of an administrative need, like, for example, the computer laptop that, yourselves would use, or maybe the librarian would use in the back more as admin, then we would not include that. But if it's a laptop that lasts 7 years and it's out in the public on the, on the floor that anyone can access the internet, then we could include that as part of the capital project list. I already mentioned about the studies and then the possible removal of land. Next slide. So here's an example of a capital expenditure. So as I said, similar to the service standard, we would identify, your wish list that would be part of the capital budget. Now, you would have your capital budgets, which at minimum, we would glean on that to fill in these forms. But if there's anything beyond the, your capital horizon, and there's things that, again, going out to 2051, then now we rely on master plans or really the knowledge of staff to be able to say, well, based on this type of growth, this is what we would need in order to provide servicing. Okay, so everything will be documented here and then be provided to council for your review. So as we're going through, as you can see, we provide the, again, the buildings, or in this case, new garage. We identify the year that it'll take place, the value. And again, the value is always in today's dollars of whenever you release the study. And then we have a bunch of deductions, which I talked about in the previous slide, with benefit to existing grants, subsidies, etc. The only thing I would just note is the one column there that says post-period benefit. So what that means is it's still growth related. So it's still DCable. However, these projects may occur outside of the time horizon. So for example, in this case, in this example, it's going out to 2042, but that garage expansion in the sand won't occur till 2045. So if that's the case, it's still growth related, but we're not going to be putting that charge or that capital cost towards the development today, because that would be unfair to the developers at the time, because it's not going to benefit them. It'll benefit the developments in the future years. So we make sure that we identify it, but it's not going to be chargeable at this point. Yes.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, just just for clarity then, so you're saying that these estimated costs are done at the time of the report, so you're not including inflation in those costs?
Correct, because through your worship, as I mentioned earlier, the development charge bylaw and the rates are indexed every year with inflation. So in essence, you are also inflating these costs by inflating the charge that you are providing from the development charge. So,
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
and one other thing as well, and these costs are estimated at this time. If you had any costs, let's say, for example, this $5 million new garage, it's an estimate. But the moment you tender it and everything goes through, it's now 6.5 million. The DCs you are allowed to fund to actual. So it just means that, if you do have to take out that extra debt, we can always adjust the DC and adjust it upwards to incorporate the actual costs. Okay. Any other questions? Next slide. So just in summary, very quick, here's the nice Coles Notes version of the DC calculation. So we take a look at all the costs of the infrastructure required to accommodate the growth. We take a look at the residential and non-residential growth. We divide one through the other, and then we get either a development charge per unit for residential. And we typically separate it between singles and semi-detached, townhouses, and then apartments, large and small. And then on the non-residential, we typically do a per square foot charge. You could do one general non-residential charge. You could split it up between industrial, institutional, commercial. Really, it's your preference as to how you want to proceed on that. Next page. Just on the local service policies. So this was implemented back in 2000. So it was always there, but it just became more apparent to have one as of 2016, because based on Section 59 of the Act, they do mention this clause called no additional levies, which means you cannot go to a developer and ask them to provide anything more than what would be required to them under the Development Charge Act. So you can't just ask for volunteer payments or, anything to top ups, that would essentially go against this rule. So the local service policy is very important to have to identify what costs would be their cost as part of a local subdivision, versus what you will include in the DC. And we do include this as part of the background study. And typically, what you do include in the local service policy is, your local roads, your internal roads. If they have to do any intersection improvements because of their development, maybe we can include that as a local service. Street lights, sidewalks, noise abatement, internal water and wastewater mains, if you want to make sure that they are the ones putting it in front of all the houses. So those are the type of things that we can include as part of a local service, and we'll work with staff to determine, what your current practices are, so that way we incorporate that. Next slide. And just briefly, again, this is for your information purposes, but this is the local service policy, almost like a schematic where anything in the blue, we would say that that's more on the DC side. So it's your supply, your big trunk mains, that would be a DCable item. Anything in that peach salmon color at the bottom really is what you would include as a local service, because it's really benefiting that, subdivision. So again, I'll leave this for your, review. Next slide. All right, coming to a close, I promise. And again, please. So again, DCs, it's not just the magic, revenue stream. Again, as I mentioned, there are a lot of exemptions that you need to adhere to. The ones at the top are the mandatory ones. So you must follow these, as per the province. So if you do have a development charge, you cannot charge, the other government. So again, you're in a two-tier system. So if the upper tier were to construct, you wouldn't charge them a DC. Likewise, if they had one and you guys build, you wouldn't have to pay as well. And then with school boards, industrial building expansions. So within the Act, industrial buildings are allowed to expand their current square footage by 50% without having to pay a DC. But we do make sure that, that doesn't get abused. So you can set up your bylaw in a way that it's a one-time exemption, because you will, if you don't do that, then you may have the situation where, have a 100 square foot building. They come in with a building permit, they go to 150, don't pay a DC, come back a year later, they want to go to 225, so on and so forth. They never pay a DC. So you can draw the line in the sand when that exemption takes place. As I mentioned with bullets 2 and 3, there is that intensification clause where I'm allowed to add up to 2 or 3 apartments now to existing or new building without having to pay a DC, as long as I don't more than double the size of the home. Again, as I already mentioned about the universities, they would be exempt if you're building on any of their lands that receive operating funding. And then I already went through all of the orange ones with the affordable, not-for-profit, et cetera. Now that's the mandatory. Discretionary exemptions are things that council and the municipality can add on. So basically customizing your bylaw. So, if you're going from, nothing to something, you can consider reducing the charge in whole or in part. You can also reduce it for either different types of developments or classes of development. So maybe perhaps you don't want, to charge places of worship, or you don't want to charge, the industrial sector, or reduced, right? You have the ability to do that. You may phase in the charge over time, although Bill 23 has forced that onto you anyways. But if you wanted to do a little bit more, you could do that as well. And then redevelopment credits. So this isn't within the act, but it is recognized under case law, where if, let's say, my house burnt down or I took a demolition credit, and tore the house down, I should be allowed a period of time to rebuild and not have to pay a development charge. So typically that's about a 5-year period. And that's not just with rebuilds as well. It's also with a change of use. So let's assume that you had one massive single detached home and you want to tear it down and put, let's say, whether it's, 3 townhomes or, a non-residential, strip or something. Well, whatever the DC is at the time, let's say the singles is $10,000, then I get a credit for $10,000 on that single detached home once it's torn down. And then let's say the multiples is at $7,000 and I wanted to build 3. So that's 21,000. So I have to pay 21, but I get a $10,000 credit within that 5-year period. So really my DC payable would be 11,000, right? So that's where the credits come in. And it works the same way with the non-residential. Next slide. So your current DC exemptions based on your water and wastewater bylaw is non-residential. So you don't charge anything for non-res at the moment for the water and wastewater for your current bylaw. However, this is now the municipal wide, so you can choose to mirror that or pick whatever you'd like. The most common ones that we see within the province, again, as I mentioned, place of worship. We see bona fide farms. So again, just really the farm, not the house itself, for the farming practices. Industrial development we see, you could choose outline an area maybe, and do downtown or infill developments. Brownfield, if you had those, we can exempt or, provide some type of reduction. Hospitals, universities and colleges, those are now mandatory, but again, historically, those were discretionary. And then affordable housing, again, that's been, kind of shoved down now, but essentially these are the type of exemptions that you could provide. Next slide. Just to give you just an overview, I mean, your current bylaw right now, 2022-067, again, you provide different DCs for your different, urban areas. So you got Port Burwell, Vienna, Stratfordville, Eden, Richmond. Through working with staff for this process, we'll have a discussion whether we keep it at these higher levels or do we just say here's a municipal wide. So we'll go through that policy review. And as I mentioned in the footnote, again, any charge that you provide is subject to the mandatory phase-in. Next. Again, I won't touch upon this too long, but for other matters, if there's any excess capacity in the system, unless there's an intention that it'll be, part of the DC recovery, they are typically any excess capacity in the system. If it's uncommitted, then it's again to the developers. But if it is committed and you have something else, then we can include that as part of the development charges. Cross subsidization, this is a big one where if you decide to lower the DC from one type, so let's say you don't want to charge non-res, you can't put that that exemption and put it onto the residential. So they are calculated in isolation. So that way we're not putting the backs on one to pay for the other. We have to do a mini long-term capital and operating infrastructure analysis. Again, that's more for us to work with staff. It's just a pen and paper exercise that we append. Nothing really turns on that. It's just a requirement from the act. And as I mentioned with the background study, there is a mandatory period for transparency. So when you do release the study, you have to wait a minimum of 60 days before you can consider a bylaw. But in between that time, as long as 2 weeks have passed, you can have a public meeting, mandatory public meeting within that 60-day period. And as I mentioned, the bylaw is allowed to be indexed every year. Next slide. Again, some of the things we will work with staff, but there are some emerging issues that, could be considered if they do affect you. What we're finding is, there are different types of housing now. In addition to your traditional townhomes, now they're going with back-to-back townhouses, stacked townhouses. Really, it's more of an apartment, but it's marketed as a townhouse. So how do we deal with those type of units? Live-work units, so the mixed use. How do we slice and dice what DC would be payable when it comes to living upstairs but working downstairs type of thing. Again, category, and then there's some other things as well where if you're experiencing any cannabis growing, would you like to charge them? Because maybe you want to exempt farms, but you don't want to exempt that type of farming. So you can pick and choose as a council to as to what you want to charge. And then just the rest is just more, again, just policy. Like, for example, apartments, you must separate the apartments between large and small at minimum, because there was a Halton decision where they tried to do just one apartment charge. But again, an apartment could be a massive apartment or it could be a small 1-bedroom or studio. We can include a special care dwelling charge. So if you think that you may have like a retirement home or a Chartwell coming one day, we can have a special charge for them, where it'd be a reduced charge, almost like a 1 person per unit type of thing. And then, we have some other ones as well where Conservation Authority, historically there was a DCs for them, but now that's not allowed. And then, like I said, with the farms and the place of worship, you can pick and choose how you want to charge. The place of worship, sometimes we even identify that it's only the place of worship portion, because sometimes you'll have a church where a good chunk of it is commercial space that they rent out as a daycare or Montessori school. Well, that's not really a place of worship. That's a commercial facility. So do you want to make that distinction as well? It's up to you. Next slide. And then just the timelines. Again, we're here today, June 15th. We are going to be having a little bit of an aggressive timeline of working with the municipality and staff all through the summer and fall months. We're hopeful to provide you with a study, or at least the background information by the end of the year, and then consider perhaps the public meeting and the consideration of the bylaw in early 2024 before the building season. However, this is all tentative. If you'd like to move faster, move slower, we're more than happy to assist however you choose to proceed. Next slide. And again, just the next steps, we'll be working with staff. Again, those spreadsheets and the gory details, we'll start be working with them. And then again, we through working with them and through your input, we can also set up any timelines into the future if you so choose. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions? I think you covered it all.
All right.
Thomas?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Byron, just a couple of questions I thought you might be able to clarify for council. You listed 6 different services that may apply to Bayonne because of our FIR. I'm wondering if you could talk about police services and waste diversion. These are services that we currently have access through third-party contracts. We don't have any capital infrastructure per se in the municipality. Would these be worthy of review for development charge purposes, given that we don't have capital in the area? And I guess my second question is for library. We have 2 libraries that we own the facility, but we lease them to the county, and the county provides the library service, circulation, infrastructure, that sort of stuff. Would the library itself, the physical building, be something that would fall under library services, or would that be something that would fall under something like Parks and Rec instead?
Great questions, through your worship. So for the first one with the police and waste diversion, it is up to staff and the council whether you'd like to explore those municipal services. As I mentioned in one of the slides, you don't have to own the service. You can also, include lease services. It's a little bit tougher because now you have to go into those contracts and figure out what is the capital component to them, and really through discussions with your service providers, figure out if you were growing by, 2, 3,000, 4,000 people over an X amount of years, and here's the number of units. How much would that contract have to increase in order to encompass servicing those units and those subdivisions? So that increment between what you're provided now versus in the future, that's what we could potentially include in the DC, but there would be a lot of legwork involved into figuring out what the capital component is for them to add another police cruiser or, another, police officer, or in this case, a recycling vehicle or organics vehicle. So, if it's one of those things where it's going to be difficult, obviously we don't want to delay the process. We could always look at it at a later date, but it's not something that you have to, include right away unless there's, an appetite for it. For the second question with the libraries, since you do own the building, if there are any expansionary needs, we could include the building costs. Clearly, if you do have a relationship with the county and they do a lot of the materials and operations, anything on the material side would be on their end, unless you have a capital contribution towards it. If your only responsibility is just the facility, and you do require an expansion to the facility to, service the growing population, then we can include the cost for the facility only.
Deputy Mayor.
Yes, thank you through you, Mr. Mayor. I know there's been quite a bit of correspondence from other municipalities and, well, municipalities in general, with concerns raised with some of the changes and with this bill. And so I guess my question to you is, looking at the timeline, do you foresee any changes to what has been proposed or what we're working with right now? Do you foresee anything coming up that's gonna kind of make this presentation or all these changes, null and void, or are we gonna have to go back to the drawing board?
Excellent question, through your worship. As of right now, I mean, it's very difficult without a crystal ball. I try to go to Queen's Park and put my ears on the wall and on the ground, but at the end of the day, we do work with the information that we have at the moment. There have been, some other bills that have been released as of late, such as Bill 97. There was another one as well, the number escapes me. But as of now, with respect to Bill 23 and how it relates to development charges, the information that we have appears to be, what we're going to be working with in the near future. Again, one of the toss-ups here perhaps is when the bulletin does get released, then we'll now know the specifics on the affordable and attainable housing. And then we'll potentially, through those bulletins, we may even encounter, what the definition or prescribed services are for the land. But as of now, since we don't know, we're operating based on best information possible.
Thank you.
Thank you, Byron.
All right. Thank you very much.
All right.
Just a quick point before we get to the motion. The recommendation does have 4 of the 6 services that we've identified. It doesn't include police services and waste diversion because they are contracts. We thought that the amount of work that would go into devising a development charge for those services would be wouldn't have a net benefit to the municipality and staff at this time. If council does want those 2 included, however, then we would just add them to the motion, but we just look for clarification at this time before we get to reading that in.
What do you think, council? You want them added? I'm seeing nods or shakes of a head, excuse me. Are we ready for the motion then? That the presentation from Watson and Associates regarding development charges kickoff presentation be received for information. And that staff be directed to work with Watson and Associates to complete and post a background study incorporating proposed development charges for the following municipal services. Services related to a highway, fire protection services, parks and recreation, library services. Do I have a mover and seconder? Councillor Chilcott. And Councillor Emerson will second. All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Anybody need a break before we go on with the next presentation? Just need a coffee. Let's do a quick 5-minute break, to recharge your coffee cup. Okay. Welcome back. We left off at section 5.2, are now to CJDL's consulting engineers regarding design, implementation of the capacity upgrades to the youth sanitary pumping station proposal. Here.
Good evening, Mayor Ketchabah, Council. And I guess the last time I was here was the inaugural meeting, Council. Got to talk sewage. Well, I'm back on the same topic again. So I had brought forward a report assessing the existing capacity of the sewage collection system, wastewater collection system for all of Bayham. So we're starting up in Eden there, down through Stratfordville, Deanna, and over down to Port Burwell, and looked at I think it was 8 different pumping stations and capacities. And one of the things that's really been driving this is some of the proposed development up in Eden, and that was identified as the most immediate need. And that's what I have a proposal here to move forward with for you this evening. Eden, there was a few charts in there. It has actually it's a really good example of the project that Byron was presenting from Watson's there for development charges. It's got 134 housing units that are serviced right now, and it's working fine for them. But with the added development, we have to look at ways to increase the capacity. So the capacity is for the new development there. We had mentioned in the previous report a few different ways of doing that. You can replace pumps, you can add a balancing tank, and control inflow and infiltration, things like that. And what we expected would be the most appropriate for Eden is to add a balancing tank. The pumps at that pumping station, they're I think we have room for about another 32 housing units that can be built before it'll reach the design capacity, or in the ECA capacity as well from the MOE. And there's a development already proposed and approved that's going to use up all of that. And so there's other developments in the works. There's infill. There's a number of houses I passed by under construction right along the road there. So moving it along to get more capacity is something that does need to move forward. The balancing tank is probably the most efficient way, and that's what we're expecting is going to be the outcome. But that's a new facility being built outside of the existing pumping station, and that requires an environmental assessment. And parts of that they require reports and studies, an environmental study, look at geotechnical, archaeological. Some of the developments around there have had some of these studies done, and we're trying to utilize as much as we can from those existing studies without creating new ones. So in the proposal, we have allowances for those, and we're hoping we can downplay how much is needed and still meet the requirements for an environmental assessment with that. The consultation will have to happen as well, so that the public immediately next door to it know what's going on in the community. The developers in the area, they're interested, and the rest of the municipalities obviously will have varying levels of interest. There might even be people that aren't interested, but there's First Nations consultation, and immediately you may think very little, but if there could be impacts downstream that they have been concerned about or something. So it gives them opportunity to raise those as well. And the ministries will be helping us out with the who all needs to be contacted. And there's a time frame with that. We're aiming to have the EA part of the project completed this year. I think it was the end of October we had on the schedule. And then it's one of those things, it's a public process, so we expect the answers going to be supporting to put in the balancing tank, but we'll consider other options as well. A balancing tank, there's options where to put it too. There's a good sized property there. We'll probably end up putting it right on site there, but other options that you can look at is putting it in another location off-site, and it just the sewage would back up and store in a different location. Store it in basements, so you got to keep the elevation deep enough that it doesn't impact any basements. We don't want overflows to happen, so there's a lot of things you look at with that. The pumps that are in the pumping station are fairly new, only a few years old. They should be able to be good for 20 years. And that was another item that influenced why I would recommend going with a balancing tank rather than replacing the pumps. The force main from Eden down to Stratfordville is the longest, smallest one. And often you can get quite a bit more capacity with the larger pumps, but with that one, the friction coefficient in a smaller pipe like that eats up your capacity very quickly, and you end up with very high pressures. And as the pumps turn off and on, you get a lot of fatigue in the pipes that kind of stretch and come back in as well. So it's rated for 150 psi, but I don't think I'd ever recommend going right to the maximum with that anyways. The other opportunity that comes out with this, in the previous study we had mentioned, there's some additional capacity in the pipes that when we looked at the actual flows that exceed what the ECAs are, which were based on design capacities. And that happens for 2 or 3 locations in the system. And if we're going to have to do an update to the current ECA, then we would also like to proceed with those for a few others. And I can't remember which stations there were, but there were some that were operating well above the capacity that they were rated at. So though it's a paper shuffle, but when you're looking at unallocated capacity, then that's what the MOE wants to see. So if you want the rated capacity for the Vienna one's 347 more units that we can build there, but I believe it has capacity for more than that. So you could, if it's operating better, and if it's 400, we would update the ECA so that you do have that 400 that it can handle. So that there's a couple of stations we would do that. As we were putting this together, I had a call from Thomas, and he says, okay, so if we upgrade Eden, and Eden flows to Stratfordville, how much can that handle? Well, that's a good question. And if we can expand Eden, and we may even exceed what Stratfordville will handle, but the charts we looked at is if we max out what Eden can handle, then that's going to max out what Stratfordville can handle, and it kind of comes all the way down, and then ultimately the treatment plant becomes an issue as well. I think we have 317 units unallocated for the south end of Stratfordville. So out of those 317, if they build 100 in Eden, that knocks that down to 217 for Stratfordville. But if they build less, then we have more left. So I get the capacity will shuffle around depending on how where the development happens. And it's very unpredictable, a lot of these where the development's going to go. And just like what Watson talked about, the projected growth is a very hard target as well. A year ago, the number of permits coming in and building going on, interest rates went up, and they just really flatlined on a lot of the building permits right now. So that's very, very difficult to project all of those things. There would be studies that go forward as you start getting closer to the new rated capacities to see new developments. If they start using less water per household, then you have more capacity available. And that's typically what happens. We try to use conservative numbers in estimating the number of units as well. With the proposal, we've budgeted about half of the cost of the engineering towards the environmental assessment part, 25% for the design of the facility, and 25% for the supervision of construction, contract administration, and as constructed drawings for it. So that's kind of the breakdown of the proposal. and there's also a 10% contingency that's allowed in there or is included on top of our work as well. So, and that included the sub-consultant work for the other studies that will have to get scoped out as we move forward. That covers most of what this proposal will do, and some of the other pumping stations downstream with larger pipes, shorter lengths, those ones will probably be able to be upgraded just with replacing pumps as that time comes. They don't require an environmental assessment for just replacing pumps. And so that those would be quicker. The environmental assessment drags out the time a little bit longer. Our proposal right now is aiming to have the design, tender, and construction completed by about the middle of next year. I think we had June, July next year. And some of that's assuming that this the environment or the ministry approval of the ECA is actually through the consolidated infrastructure CLI. And I believe that's what we're expecting it is. If we do have to go through ministry approval through Toronto MOE approvals, then that's will take a longer period to get the approvals. So that's and the rules do change with various aspects of it over time. So and I guess that's also similar to the development charges. They keep having new things that come out. So this is based on today's rules. Does that help out? Understand?
Are there questions? Deputy Mayor.
Thank you through you, Mr. Mayor. I'm sorry. Just perhaps maybe a question to staff, if I could, just for clarity, this is funded through the wastewater reserve?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to council. So there are a couple of options that staff have considered. Options being the wastewater reserve and the environmental reserve. The environmental reserve wouldn't cover the full cost of this, so there is the option to split between the two, but between wastewater and environmental, there's more than enough funds there.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, just at a longer term, when do we have to start thinking about water treatment plant for rural? Because we talked earlier at that first meeting, the planning window was so large. At some point, we have to start looking at that, I think, in order to stop the growth 8 years from now. So when do we start looking at that?
Yeah, again, that's going to depend a lot on what happens with development. Most of the developer clients that we work for are very anxious to keep going. They think that the housing market is going to turn around. The province is still aiming for this 1.5 million houses by 2015. And if it does turn around, it'll be sooner rather than later. There's unallocated capacity from the treatment plant as of late last year was just under 393 from anywhere that's serviced by it. So probably Mark would have a good handle on what the development or like the permits coming in are, and they were a lot higher and they dropped down again. So that makes it harder. You really should have at least a year of design, a year of construction, and maybe a year of grace there as well to get that going. So if you expect 50 per year, you've got 8 years that it'll go there. So that's probably the best forecasting you could do is estimating number of units per year.
Thomas?
Yeah, just to follow up that point, that's probably a fair target based upon what we're currently seeing for building in Bayham. We saw development sort of fall off a cliff right at the end of 2022, and it's been very slow from a housing or dwelling perspective so far in 2023. Our last quarter of 2022 was the first quarter we hadn't issued a building permit for a house in over 8 years. So things like that are impacting the degree to which we see the capacity at the plant be used up. It's probably worthwhile to start that discussion if we target 4 or 5 years time down the road for a start of an EA and any works necessary. It's not something that's we're projecting is pressing during this term of council, but it's definitely a worthwhile discussion to have at a broader scale as we get, closer to the next election. It might require some sort of master servicing study that takes a look not only at the sanitary system, but takes a look at the water system in Vienna and Port Burwell and general aquifer capacity in the north end, depending on how much development we actually see come back once interest rates level out and development starts to, come back into the municipality. We know of 3 developments that got put on hold by respective developers near the end of the year because of interest rates, and have seen no pickup in that regard since that time. So it's a holding pattern at this point in time, but there will be further discussion had at a staff level about how to best approach it comprehensively.
Okay, 3, well, just supplementary 3. I guess it, like you should consider, because, you're saying, you 2 are always saying about, oh, the Volkswagen plant's gonna push stuff and everything. Are we participating in that growth or not? Because if we don't start planning for that, then we will miss out on all the excess growth or housing that has to go with the 3,000 or so people that are supposed to be working there. We just step aside that if we wait 5-6 years.
I think you're missing the point, but you're right. That was an announcement that came along after the original report that came before council. That report did suggest within a 5-year time horizon, it's time to start looking at the sewage treatment plant. I know that the county will be investigating through the planning and ECDEV and trying to work with the city of St. Thomas to estimate what the impacts of the EV battery plant are going to have on the surrounding region. And it's more than just that. You got to take a look at the Amazon Center up the Broccolini Center and what kind of impact those 1,600 workers are going to have on the region as well. So yes, there's the opportunity for tremendous growth. And how the economy is going to affect the build outs at this point. It's very in flux. But
Oh,
you're
I
right, we need
know,
to-
but I just was wanting to make sure that was on in our sites, because we could just step aside from that, like 400 units and Eden chewing them up, and then I don't know, they always say Vienna has the most available service stops, could just be left out of the running.
No, point taken. Thank you. Anything else? We're kind of in a spot. We've got to do this. We've got to do this. So, thank you.
Thank you.
There are no other questions. The motion would read that the presentation from CJDL Consulting Engineers regarding design and implementation of the capacity upgrades to the Eden Sanitary Pumping Station proposal be received for information. And that the council, the corporation, the municipality of Bayham sole source the design and implementation of the capacity upgrades to the Eden Sanitary Pumping Station to CJDL Consulting Engineers based on their proposal and with an approved upset limit of $78,570.12 inclusive of HST. And that the above noted project be funded from the wastewater reserve and the environmental reserve. Do I have a mover and seconder? Councillor Chilcott will move, Councillor Emerson will second. All in favor? That's carried. Which brings us to item C, Simon McLinden, regarding the Canoe Procurement Group of Canada. It's still evening, so good evening.
Is it? Good evening. I'm going to ask kindly that you share my screen because my laptop didn't make it all the way here with a battery. There we go. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council, members of the public. Thank you for having me. My name is Simon McLinden. I am the National Strategic Account Manager with Canoe Procurement Group of Canada. I'm joined tonight by my colleague, Sarah Hubble, who moving forward would actually be your day-to-day service representative. I realize we've gone from development charges to sewage and now the incredibly exciting topic of procurement. So I will endeavor to keep this as short as humanly possible. We're going to do kind of a high level overview of the way our organization works and the structure of how we operate. And then I'll kind of run through some more commodity based programming as kind of an example of what we do. A little bit of background. I met your public works team at the OGRA conference, the Ontario Good Roads Conference back in April, I believe it was. And we'd had some previous contact before, and one of our vendors was there, and we were introduced. We look after all of Ontario. Sarah's portfolio covers 438 of the 444 municipalities, and if we'd gone alphabetically, I would have been here sooner. So it's kind of just a high level overview of Canoe and how we work, and I will go from there. So if we could hit the first slide, please. So who is Canoe? So we are by reach Canada's largest not-for-profit cooperative buying group. A cooperative buying group is a gathering of many municipalities. In our situation, it's 5,000 members across the country. We started in 1936 as a vehicle for Alberta municipalities, actually rural municipalities in Alberta, to purchase rat poison. They were getting a little over the top on the price, and they all got together and said, well, if we buy it all in bulk, we might be able to negotiate a discount. And then fast forward 100 odd years almost, and now we can, buy fire trucks and graders and boxes of paper and kind of everything in between. So we only operate in the mush sector. We are a government-owned entity. We are owned wholly by a municipal association. And then the way our organization is structured, and I'll go into that in a second, is we partner with a municipal association in every province in the country, with the exception of the Yukon, because up until recently, they haven't actually had one. Where they do now, we're in discussions with them, and the province of Quebec for a multitude of reasons, which we won't get into this evening. Most of which is translating 1.5 million pages of documentation is a challenge for any organization, especially a small not-for-profit. So yeah, school districts, municipalities, hospitals, post-secondary education, general individual not-for-profits, if they chose to use our program. We don't serve the benefit as much, but ultimately 96% of our business is probably within the municipal sector in some capacity. Our programs and the way we drive and deliver programs come from the needs of municipalities for the most part. Then there's a fringe benefit for those outsiding organizations within that sector, in the same way that there are educational group buying and medical services group buying organizations, both for and not for profit across the country. And occasionally a municipality can benefit from some of their contracts. We're municipal first, and then the benefits kind of expunge out to the others. We are Sourcewell's Canadian partner. So just to touch on what Sourcewell is a government-owned US-based cooperative purchasing agency. They run about $4.5 billion annually through their programs. They again started small beginnings education systems in Minnesota, and then they've grown to become a rather large behemoth. And very fortunately for us and all of the members of our program, we leverage their contracts to turn over further savings and a much broader reach of contracts than any other GPO into the country. So the way that relationship works, we post all of their tenders in Canada on their behalf through our legal team, through our procurement experts. We post them, in BC, we use BC Bid, in Ontario, we use Merx, in Nova Scotia, we use the relevant platforms, all government approved, to keep that within inside the legislation of the CFTA, which is the governing documentation that tells you how you can and can't buy things as a government entity. And then we award to, and that also gives all of the Canadian vendors a fair shake at getting a hand in our contracts, of which we have many. So next slide. That's the map highlighting the gray area that is Quebec. We'll just skip that one. That's just an illustration of all of our municipal partners. So in Ontario, we partner with LAS through AMO. So I'm sure everybody's familiar with the Association of Municipalities of Ontario. Their business services division is LAS. And the way our operation works is, depending on which province of the country that we are doing business, as I said, we have business from coast to coast. We have a municipal partnership from coast to coast. We are a not-for-profit. So the way we make our money is through administration fees. So when municipalities use our program to purchase something, let's say you purchase something to the value of $100,000, there would be a 2% administration fee, is a pretty common number attached with that. In Ontario, when that purchase is made, 1% of it goes towards myself and Sarah and the Canoe organization for, the drive to get here, and computers and all of the good stuff and education that we deliver. And then the other half of that actually goes back to AMO. So when you make a purchase, you're creating a circular economy, which reinvests back into the municipal association that supports you on things like lobbying, development charges, and all of that good stuff that they do. So how do we help and what do we do? In short, group buying organizations exist for two reasons. The first is we save you money. How do we save you money? So we have the buying power of our 5,000 members. And if we combine that with our partner organization in the US, we have the combined buying power of 55,000 members. So to put that in a real world example, I understand you guys are coming up in the soon, and you'll be looking at plow trucks or triaxle trucks or something within your municipality. If we look at that, you go out to tender for that, or you go through that process, you're getting pricing based on BAM, right? That's you're getting You might get a discount through a government service charge or a long-standing relationship or something to that effect, but ultimately the price you're receiving is based on the one member. If you have a regional purchasing group, maybe you'll get that based on 8 or 9, maybe 10 or 11, or if you're buying a large multitude of something, which generally in smaller municipalities, plow trucks would not be a good example of that.
Mhm.
We go out to tender for the category of winter maintenance equipment, which covers, all types of plow equipment, all types of sidewalk equipment, and then we have truck contracts and chassis contracts and all of those different things. And all of that stuff that comes back to us, we're getting pricing based on access to all 5,000 of those members. So in Canada, everybody in Ontario specifically, everybody who's a member of LAS is already a member of our program. When we go to tender, we have to indicate by law all of the different organizations that currently or may utilize the program. So with our partnership in AMO in Ontario, we list your municipality because you are a member of AMO. Whether you choose to use us up to now or not, or whether we haven't got to the alphabetical presentation side yet, 444 is a lot of municipalities, trust me.
Mhm.
Once we get to that point, then we kind of switch you on and you get access to our contracts, but you're already listed as a member. We just have to do some housekeeping stuff on the other way. So the next time you go to purchase a plow truck or a box of paper or a TV screen, and there's a dozen things in this room that you could probably buy through our program, we've got preferred pricing on that, usually at a discount against MSRP, based on the access to all 5,000 of those people across the country. And more importantly, probably the second thing we do as an organization, especially in smaller municipalities, smaller to medium municipalities, is we save you time. And I'm unsure, I wish I'd asked before I walked in, if you have a dedicated procurement resource, you have a dedicated procurement team, depending on the size of your municipality, usually that falls onto the burdens of the public works managers. They write the tenders for the trucks. I mean, no disrespect, but they're not procurement experts. They don't have legal degrees. They do their best with what they have. There's usually a large process of maybe you'll copy and paste or use from previous tenders that have been issued, lean on a neighbor, lean on a larger municipality and kind of borrow from that. What we do is we go to tender once for that category. It's usually a 3-year to 4-year contract with a 1 to 2 year extension period. And then you can utilize the savings that come with that and be fully compliant within the CFTA. So if we look at something like a fire truck, average time for a municipality to procure a fire truck in Ontario is probably about 250 hours of administrative time, right? It's a pretty heavy burden. And if you elongate that 250 hours over that period of time, or even something like a snowplow, you're probably looking at somewhere between these days 6 and 8 months to get that tender either created, out the door, marketed, evaluated, awarded to the point where you issue a PO. In our world, in its simplest form, you need a fire truck, you identify the brand and manufacturer that you need to utilize. You look through our programs. If we have that manufacturer, you can call them up, deliver the spec, they quote you a price with a predetermined discount, and you can issue a PO for that product, and you're fully within the confines of the law. The reason we do that is because of that full public and very open tendering process that you have to issue as a municipality, we do on your behalf. We just do it nationally. So it's kind of a municipal tender on administrative steroids would probably be the best way to do it. So when we tender categories as opposed to individual items, which allows us to get pretty deep discounts and then in turn save that time for the municipality. Additional benefits for using Canoe, and probably the largest one, we are free. We are a municipal service. We're owned by municipal organizations. We are a member-facing organization. So we work for the municipalities in the respective province that we're doing business. So in Ontario, Sarah represents all of the members with the exception of the large lawyer heavy municipalities about an hour and a half that way. That's on me to deal with. And then we do all of that heavy administrative lifting for you, and it's all taken care of to the point where you can just kind of switch on and make that process. We have 269, I think, suppliers with 269 contracts across about 63 different categories. So in our world, like I mentioned, that could be anything from a plow truck, and a simplified discount on that is we have a member that you go out and say, right, we've been buying winter equipment from this manufacturer for the last 20 years, which you probably have. We already have that manufacturer listed. You can call up, make that decision. There's a 25% discount applied to the retail cost of that truck. You get it about 3 months earlier through the process because you've just saved that time. And then you can do that on commodity-based equipment. You can do that on that once every 12-year fire truck purchase that you make. You can do it for televisions. You can do it for cameras, kind of everything in between. If we use the example of a hockey arena or any type of recreation facility, we can do the ice resurfacing machine, the ice refrigeration itself, like through a ice refrigeration company, the boards, the glass, the paint, the doors, probably the windows if we could really get creative, security cameras, the computers for the municipal staff upstairs, What we can't give you is an architect to tell you how to build the arena. We can give you the digital scoreboard, but we can't provide the hockey teams to make the scores, and we can't give you the Zamboni driver. Everything else is probably able to be acquired through our program. And that's kind of the way we look at it. Human capital is difficult to tender. We can't replace Pete here, unfortunately. We're working on it, but service-based contracts are a little bit more complicated as far as, because they're job specific, right? So we don't really tend to play in that. You can do quotes and cost analysis through our program. So in the municipal world, obviously, there's a lot of discussion on, well, we have to take low bid. That's essentially true. We want to award local. Well, unfortunately, legally, there's not actually a precedent to award local. You can try your best to do so, but ultimately, if you go out to tender for a grader, for example, and a municipal and a distributor in British Columbia comes back, meets all of the specs, and it outbids your local guy, but it's still the same product, technically, you're not actually allowed to award to your local person just because he's local. Use our program, you buy that grader, whether it be through John Deere, Caterpillar, name, insert, household name that you know, you buy it from the most local distributor, always. So when you look at the example of that plow truck, you're going to work with the representative that you've been working with. It's going to go through the Ontario-based distributor. We're not a wholesaler. We don't own anything. We don't have a warehouse full of fire trucks. I wish we did. It would make our jobs a lot easier, but we just facilitate the contracts and provide the savings and the discount. You can run free quotes. So if you want to go out and get 3 quotes in a category where we would have multiple vendors, so heavy equipment's a great example of that. Fire trucks are a good example of that. You could go out and say, right, I'm going to get a quote from X, Y, and Z, and then you could still shop it on low bid, but you're not circumnavigating the tender process. The competitive and administrative heavy part has already been completed. All of our documentation for every tender, every award, every evaluation, even down to the pricing discounts and the resolution of the board of directors who award the contract, is publicly available online, proof of publication, every single part of it at any juncture, available to any member of the public with no password, no backend facing. The only thing we do run into from time to time is we might have a vendor that won't publish their pricing discount or documentation just because they might be the only vendor in that category. And if they were to publicly announce that, then obviously they lose their competitive advantage. But we can make it available to people at request. It's done internally. We also have no minimum purchasing requirements. So you could use Canoe to purchase as much or as little as you like. You could buy all of your office supplies from today until the end of time. You could buy every plow truck, every Zamboni, anything you wanted to dream up, but you also don't have to at all. So if you have a long-standing relationship, you're in a grandfathered contract, for example, you don't have to utilize our program. We don't have minimum spends. You know, we have municipalities that just use us for office supplies, and we have municipalities that use us for everything. You know, City of Toronto doesn't need to use us for their things like office supplies because their buying power is more than substantial enough to do it on their own. But they buy their fire trucks from us because it's a lot quicker than going through their procurement departments. So we have a value depending on what it is your needs and bases are, particularly in small municipalities. We're really taking a lot of work away from administration. That's kind of where we go. Next slide. From a compliance piece, I won't spend too much time on this, even though it's probably the most important. So this Canadian Free Trade Agreement, ultimately, that's the be all and end all governing documentation in Ontario. There are some supplementary regulations, but we are fully compliant with all of them. Kind of put that in perspective. We've never received a challenge or gone to a courtroom on anything that's been acquired through our program, touch wood, and we've never had any type of legal interference on that. We're fully within the regulations. Section 7, 1 through 5 of the CFTA clearly outlines how we have to tender as a group buying organization and your requirements as a municipality to use us. You have to post what's called a notice of intent. And I was trying to take a look here, but my reception wasn't so good. And it's just essentially a notice to the public, for vendors and for members of the public, to say Municipality of Bayham will participate in the LAS Canoe buying group as required as we move forward. And that covers your satisfaction, because what that's doing is, 1, the CFTA tells you have to do it, which is probably the most important part. And secondly, if you drive a shiny new grader down the street and a manufacturer sees that and says, well, I never saw a tender for that. How did they do that without going publicly? And then they look and they see, oh, you may have bought it through the buying group. You're covered from all of your legal angles. And then you can kind of pick and choose. There's some arguments around cost of ownership too in today's world and supply chain. You're not kind of bound by low bid as much as you used to be. You can make a decision to go with someone that might arrive 6 months earlier, or it might be something in the fleet that you already own. If you've got a fleet of X, Y, and Z, there's a cost of ownership argument there. I was talking with Public Works outside, and I think they've implemented a matrix like that for purchasing as it goes. But if you've got a fleet of brand X and then low bid comes in at Y, it's probably not in the best interest of the municipality using our program even within the confines of the CFTA, you can kind of make those choice decisions. Next slide. It's pretty powerful stuff here for the procurement nerds in the room. So if you look at this, this is kind of your traditional versus your cooperative procurement method as we operate as Canoe. So it's an 11-step process. Generally, some municipalities have a couple more. The larger you are, generally the more steps there are added to this process. But as the standard process rolls, this is what it would look like for your traditional procurement. And then 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, we've done that bit for you. It's not being skipped. Can't stress that enough. We don't circumnavigate the RFP process. The full public and compliant and competitive element. And you can see where every one of our vendors ranked. You see against their competitors on any category you would like to see. It's all there and publicly available. We just do that for you so you can take advantage of the streamlining and the cost effectiveness of using someone who's getting pricing based on 5,000 or 55,000 against getting on one. Next slide. I'll very briefly touch on some programs. So we have 2 different types of contracts, and most of them rely on 2 different types of programs. So we have commodity-based services, which especially in the smaller municipality world, ultimately that's probably where you're going to see the most benefit. You buy a fire truck once every 8 years, you buy a plow, maybe you buy one a year to replace out of a fleet of 6, depending on what the size of the municipality is. The day-to-day sales, saving stuff that you would purchase as a municipality. So a lot of the things in this room, your laptops, your pads and pens, your tires on the municipal vehicles, sometimes the municipal vehicles themselves, any type of upfitting on your vehicles, things to that effect, culverts, day-to-day supplies, MRO, we have contracts for all of that. Essentially, they're account-based, and then you would get access to, if a tire is retail X, we have an entire list of every category of 5 different brands of tires, and we have a pretty substantial saving. So, a Snow Plus tire might be $3,200 or $3,800 out in the wild. For municipalities through our program, it might be $2,200. It's fairly substantial savings on the day-to-days. They're account-based. These are things you don't even need to go to tender for traditionally. And then we have the capital purchasing program, which is the big, heavy and shiny snow plows and winter maintenance equipment and trucks and graders and playgrounds and, everything in between. So we'll quickly run through the day-to-day stuff. These are all of the commodity-based programs are issued by Canoe. They're done by us in-house, exclusively Canadian. We're not doing the US bidding program for any of this stuff. So it's all done by us. So we'll quickly go through. So benefits for a municipality of your size, this is actually a pretty exciting one. We just got the legal approval to do benefits in Ontario. So I'm not sure how your benefits program works currently, if you're part of a larger group of other municipalities, if it's something that you go to tender for on an annual basis, which is what it is. We have a partnership with an organization that can come in, run a full assessment without you going to tender, and they've got access to pretty much every major benefit provider in the country. And then they can do that in a streamlined process without having to go to that whole public forum and then end up just signing over the same benefits package every year. The benefits landscape has changed drastically since COVID started, things like wellness benefits and people working from home and what is the usage of medications and things like that. And they can run all of that against your entire municipal staff. So it's a very exciting new program for us in Ontario. And we finally got over all of the legality that we have to get to offer that to our members. Next one down would probably be, if I was to guess, culverts. Yes. So we have a relationship with Armtec. Some municipalities in Ontario, well, most municipalities in Ontario actually tend to tender out their culvert product through part of a larger job. So we're doing a sewer main replacement, we're doing a street replacement. The culvert will come as part of that. And unfortunately, what happens is the contractor marks up the price of that steel. They mark up the price of that plastic. The municipality knows it, but it's an easier way to just tender it as part of a whole job. Now you can do that slightly differently, take a little bit back of ownership. We have one exclusive contract with Armtec. It's our single biggest program in the country. The further west you go, the more municipalities take on the burden of culverts and installations and different types of maintenance on their own. In Ontario, it tends to be third party. It's very, very worth looking into what you would buy on an annual basis on a culvert thing. And I just heard that they're about to build a large factory just down the street, this manufacturer. So that's good. Next would be tires. So Michelin, Goodyear, Cal Tire, Yokohama, Fountain Tire, all of the brands you're generally familiar with. Keep going down. Office supplies we've talked about. So this is actually out to tender right now. Currently, we have it with Staples. I think it expires at the end of June. We'll have a new office supplies contract. We have no reason to believe that Staples wouldn't be part of that again. They have been for a long time, but we can't talk to them right now because it's out for tender. So to be continued. But we do have an office supplies program. Auto parts through Napa. if you buy through a local Napa store, if you buy through a regional Napa store, again, if you have a local mechanic who sells tires from Michelin, you can run our Michelin backend account, continue to buy it through your local distributor. If you've got a local Cal Tire or your local Fountain Tire, whoever may be the closest, they've got access to run all of these savings through you and keep the business as local as possible. Same with Napa. It's an account-based setup in the end. Next slide. Fleet upfitting, all the things you need to bolt to, attach to, in front of any type of thing. These folks can also build you, light duty plow trucks, dump bodies, anything like that from the ground up, including the access to the chassis. Keep going. Traffic supplies, everything from placemaking signs to rental of pylons for highway maintenance, anything kind of in between. Ontario street signs, the digital signs that tell me I'm going too fast when I pull up to my daughter's school, any of those kind of things that you can think of, we have those as well. Going down. Geospatial, so for your public works teams, your laser levels, surveying equipment, all of that. Electrical supplies, we'll just keep going. MRO, so MRO is a very big category for us. It's a US based or Sourcewell based contract, but we manage all of it out of our administrative offices in Canada. You guys buy garbage bags, you buy nuts and bolts, you buy fasteners, you buy welding machines, you buy whichever one of these manufacturers, and it's probably one of those three that you collect this stuff through. We set you up with a back end account. All of a sudden, there's a category based discount on the things you've been buying forever. They just become cheaper. That's all it is. There's not really too much back end work that has to be done. We take care of it. And then the capital purchasing program, which is your plow trucks, your backhoes, your playgrounds, your skate parks. You throw a category at me and we probably have it in some capacity. It's even at the point where we've got a contract with GovDeals. So when you go to sell your surplus equipment, the percentage you pay is less. So we've thought of buying and selling. We have rentals. You can get used equipment through certain contracts. Like I said, all of the publicly, and when it won't go into contracts tonight, it will be here until much longer than the development charges. But it's we're ultimately, we have a solution for most things. And if you have any questions, we're the education piece. So we're the liaison between the membership and the vendors. We can help facilitate those relationships, get those local dealerships churning. We also have a contract management team that deal with the heavy lifting on the administration side. So they do the tenders. We have in-house legal counsel. So if you ever have any questions around how this is compliant, how it fits within your internal policies, we can do a review of all that stuff and kind of guide you in the right direction. Our legal team's available to you at any time for no cost. There's never a cost to use Canoe. Cost will always come from the vendor. The vendor's not contractually allowed to build that additional cost into you as well. So if we're charging a 1% administration fee, they can't then add 1% to the price that they charge you. It comes from the vendor. We're benefiting them as much as we're benefiting the municipality in certain circumstances, because they may no longer be in that competitive bid, right? They can pick up the phone, they can talk to your public works department, your recreation department. You know that you want to use their product. They're no longer in that competitive element that they used to be. It's a pretty simple process. You can pick up the phone, you can make the phone calls, you run it through us, you CC us on some emails, we check your compliance and make sure everything's done. And then, that's how Canoe works. That's the general overview. I'll turn it over to questions. I appreciate your time. I know I rushed through that. Difficult to get through with the accent, I know.
Well, we appreciate the brevity of your presentation.
Procurement's not an exciting topic. We got to try and make it fun sometimes.
Absolutely. No, seriously, no, thank you for that. I am curious, and I'll plead ignorance here. What does Canoe stand for?
That's a great question. Through yourself, Mr. Mayor. So the Canoe brand, what you may be actually familiar with is in 2019, when we launched in Ontario, it was the LAS buying group, right? It's a service provided. We are still a service provided by LAS. We are directly Canoe employees. We have a team of Canoe employees across the country. It got very confusing come the pandemic, because someone like myself, who has a national portfolio, I would have an email address for LAS. I would have an email address for the Nova Scotia Federation of Municipalities. I would have one for the rural municipalities of Alberta. I can barely get through one email address. 6 is a lot. So we rebranded all of the buying groups across the country just as Canoe. 2 reasons. One, bilingual. It's the same in both languages, which is ironic given the Quebec thing. And then secondly, that's how they did trade. So when settlers first came to Canada and the fur trade started, it was all done by Canoe. So
Not an acronym, Brand.
no, it's not an acronym. It's just the physical usage of a transportation water vessel. Yeah.
I love it.
With a grader on top.
Yeah.
Now the canoes have gotten bigger. They're more barges these days. And ironically, we get asked all the time, but we don't procure canoes. It's one of the few things we don't have.
Well, that's it. That's a deal breaker.
Right.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you through you, Mr. Mayor. I'm gonna ask you again, since we're on the acronym topic, what does MSLP mean? You said it so fast. I was like, what is that?
Good question through you, Mr. Mayor. I told you the accent would be difficult. MSRP, so your
RP.
retail price, yeah. So if a product is $200,000 retail and we have a 36% discount on it, to the discount thing, we're probably, the average discount I would say is somewhere between 15 and 37% is the general range that covers most of your heavy equipment. Some of them go down as low as 3%. And then ironically, we have an engineering service that would go up as high as 78%. Sarah used to work for that company, so we're quite familiar with them. But that it's a discount off the retail price at the period of time. The reason it's a discount off price is with the world changing and supply chain and a lot of the challenges that we've had, line item pricing on a contract basis is very difficult to do now, because this pen might be, 15 cents today. With inflation and supply chain and all the struggles in any industry, next week it might be 18 cents. So the discount will remain the same, but the retail price can cover the vendor's side of inflation. It protects you from things like scary surcharges when you take delivery of your pen 15 months from now, which is what your average piece of heavy equipment's looking at. You're not going to have that 30% increase on that because it's protected against the MSP.
Okay. Through you, Mr. Mayor, I have a question. Do you have any concrete examples? Like, it all sounds really good, but I mean, even we recently awarded equipment tenders. Is there any way we could supply the specs and say you could have done better?
100%. We can run a comp set against anything you want to purchase.
Why don't we do that? Like
Ask those guys.
Sorry, please, if we're gonna speak, you have to come to the microphone.
That's all right.
It's okay.
But yes, short answer through you, Mr. Mayor, we absolutely can. So we can also run, if you look at something like our office supplies contract or our auto parts contract, usually the municipality will have a basket of goods. So we can run a comparative analysis against the basket of goods cost that you pay today. And if you were to run it through the Canoe program, sometimes, surprisingly, even in 2023, there are occasions where you might be on a historical contract or you've had a long-standing deal where you might be getting a better price. And you know what? If you can, great. Again, you're not obligated to use Canoe. We're designed to be a municipal service as required. So we'll run the comp set. If the comp set comes back that it's still in your favor, till that levels out, keep doing what you're doing.
Simon, one of the things that we were hearing up at the Good Roads Conference is that going forward, you probably can't get a tandem truck.
Through you, I wouldn't say that's the case. It's not that you won't be able to get a truck unless you go through Canoe. That's not how we operate, right?
I'm saying you might not be able to source one.
But it would depend on what the usage of the truck is and what the manufacturer is telling you. So to speak a little bit on supply chain, in the chassis world, it's allocations. So the big issue is allocation. So how much is, if we look at a used manufacturer A, and I won't name any names because everybody's got different allocation issues. They'll say, well, we've allocated 18 trucks to dealership A, we've allocated 18 chassis to dealership B, 36 to dealership C. We don't have any preferential treatment on whether we get access to those chassis or not, right? We have a predetermined price at which they have to let it go. We can kind of speed up the process a little bit because if you identify, like on the flip side as well, if you see a piece of equipment that's offered by one of our manufacturers sitting on a lot that might not be there tomorrow, through our program, you can get it today. Is another way of looking at it. We've just gone through this with a tri-axle dump truck for a municipality. I don't know if there's any truth to that you won't be able to get them. I've never heard that. That's the first I've heard it. We are not immune to the supply chain issues, whether you buy them through Canoe or not. The question is how are the dealerships handling their allocations? Unfortunately, we don't have any control over that.
Okay. Any additional questions? Councilor Chilcott.
Thank you. I just want some clarification. You mentioned that you have suppliers that you go out and you source the fire trucks for, and then you get the best prices. Do you just list the best price for us to go in and shop on, or do you list several prices based on like that are in the same boat or same area?
Yeah, great question through you, Worship. So we don't list any prices of what a retail cost would be because it fluctuates so much. So the way we run our tenders against what you would run as a municipality. So let's say, you're going to tender for fire truck, just here's the specifications, you throw it out to the public. And then you get back and you evaluate based on how it fits that. We can't do that. Otherwise, we'd have to tender thousands and thousands of fire trucks every year. So we tender the category of fire apparatus, which is our fancy way of saying fire trucks. And then you can go in there and we have a list of pre-approved suppliers. The way we evaluate is very similar to the way you would evaluate as a municipality. We have a scoring system out of 1,000, which is, I think, 90% of the way our tenders work. In that scoring system, there's things like warranty, marketability, company profile. The discount is the heaviest weighting, so it's 400 out of 1,000 is the score that they go against. And then based on, if we get 150 submissions on a tender, which for an organization with the scope we have isn't that not that crazy, we might award to 20, and then into Canada that have the ability to service our membership based on what we deem to be appropriate, abilities and dealership networks and things to that effect. We might, I think in our fire truck category, using that example, it's whittled down to 7. So you would be able to go online and see manufacturer A has a 12% discount, manufacturer B. Fire trucks are a funny one because it's one of the few that's just a dollar amount. So if your quoted truck is $1 million, which I'm sorry to say in today's world isn't that crazy for a fire truck anymore, when that comes back down, you would see that against that $1 million, you would get a $15,000 US, and then you do the exchange rate discount against that truck, or it's 5% or it's 8%. Every manufacturer is different, but how they weight that pricing, you have access to see that in the evaluation at any time. So it's very rare that we'll have a listed price for something, and we weight the pricing evaluation very largely in our criteria, because cost of ownership is a very important discussion, especially in 2023. But ultimately, there's still municipalities that are going to want to go with low bid, right? And if it's something like a fire truck, it's very complex. If it's something like a lawnmower, not anything against lawnmowers, but it's a slightly simpler purchase in the fact that if you just want to take the cheapest one through our program or through public tender, however you choose, you're probably going to do that, right? It's best value. Lawnmowers probably have a pretty similar life cycle depending on what it is you're looking at. Fire truck, much bigger argument for hey, we already have 3 of these. When we replace one, we probably get another one of the same, but the percentage discount by brand is always publicly listed, with those rare exceptions where there's one manufacturer, and then we'll provide it to you with a simple email to your client relations manager.
Okay.
But we evaluate price as the largest. It's still the largest component. We also now are implementing like ESGs and social procurement within our things. We're keeping up to speed with the trends as best we can as well.
So if we were to join this, sign up for this, we can still go out and purchase wherever we want. We can look at your fire truck and say, yeah, that's not what we want, go someplace else. There's no commitment, there's no.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. Absolutely. Yeah.
And thirdly, you said a 1 to 2% charge is what you get paid 1 for 2. So I missed, who pays that? Do we pay that or the suppliers?
The supplier.
Okay.
So the suppliers, we have an administration fee, and it's essentially just services rendered for doing the tenders, doing council meetings and education, and we host conferences and we do all that type of stuff. We try to attend trade shows and network and grow our membership base to turn those savings over. There's obviously a cost associated with that. And then we take that administration fee and it gets distributed. We operate as a not-for-profit, and that money comes from the vendors. It does not come from us. And then even again, there are other group buying organizations out there, 100%. We are very unique in the sense that depending on where we're operating that day of the week, we split that administration fee with the municipal association. So you spend $2, there's 1% or 2% administration fee. Canoe gets a cent. It might even be half a cent, depending on the type of contract. Some of like on a fire truck, $1 million unit, that it's probably closer to 0.385% is what that administration fee is. And then we split that with AM or LAS. Yeah.
So just one more thing. Do you also do services?
Services how?
Cleaning services or
Do you-
hydro?
Can I borrow your crystal ball? So we're actually doing a cleaning services contract right now. It's going out to tender. It's being built. I'm not sure where we are in that. It's probably a couple of months away, I would say. Our tenders are long and complex and they take time. Services is not as prevalent as goods. There are some exceptions to that. So using the example of that refrigeration contract. So there's a service attached with the good that you could purchase through, or you could just get the contract for the maintenance. We're looking into things like accounting, auditing, legal, things that would be more service-based in that way. Things like window cleaning, grounds maintenance, stuff to that effect. Unfortunately, no, just because it's so complicated to tender because it's so individually based on each specific requirement. Yeah. We are trying actively to find niche spots within the service industry that we can service. Like, I come from a municipal background. I wish we had a contract for economic development consultants. Right? Because there's a kind of a laundry list of 5 or 6 in Ontario that everybody uses.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, anything else? Okay, thank you, Simon.
Thank you so much for your time.
We have a motion that reads that the presentation from Simon McLinden regarding canoe procurement group of Canada be received for information. We have mover and seconder. Councillor Emerson will move. Councillor Chilcott will second. All in favor? That's carried. Moving on with the agenda, section 7. Adoption of the minutes of the previous meeting. They include the minutes of the special meeting held June 1st, 2023, and the regular council meeting held June 1st, 2023. Everyone's had opportunity to peruse those minutes. Are there any errors or omissions? Seeing none. The motion would read that the minutes of the special and regular meetings of council held June 1st, 2023 be approved as presented. Mover and seconder. Councillor Emerson will move. Deputy Mayor Weiser will second. All in favor? That's carried. Brings us to section 11, physical services, emergency services. 11.2 reports to council. We have report PS 10/23 by Steve Adams, Manager of Public Works, Training Superintendent, regarding RFP 2301, Corporal East Beach and Corporal Community Park Washroom Maintenance Award. Good evening, Steve.
Good evening, your worship, members of council. So yes, RFP 2301 for the Port Burwell East Beach and Port Burwell Community Park Washroom Maintenance Award. As you know, the East Beach and the Community Park in Port Burwell are, we have a agreement 0753 with Elgin Maintenance. They take care of the garbage, the cleaning of the washrooms, from sidewalks to sweeping 7 days a week. They open and close the washroom 8 a.m. to 9 p.m. at night. So it's a pretty demanding operation. However, this is partly to stay within compliance of the blue flag, to have such service level. So March 1st, 2021, we went into agreement with PK Property Maintenance, which in last spring of April 22, that company name transferred to Elgin Property Maintenance, at which time they've done a spectacular job down there when we need them, cleaning it, open and closing. I have no complaints with their services. However, we were given notice on May 13th of termination of the agreement, which they followed 45 days as listed within the agreement. So this brings us to June 27th. We were in need for a new contractor. So the RFP went out June 5th. We had one applicant, Agatha's Cleaning Service. This is a local company to Port Burwell. I did do some follow-ups on some references and heard nothing bad. So with cost wise, it actually came in pretty close with a little bit of savings for annual, $372 for an annual difference. With that, staff's recommendation is move ahead and let's keep the service going down there. Within that RFP, I did ask or add in an extra cleaning on holidays and weekends. So that'd be a noon cleaning, since both previous contractors were down there during the day anyways. So yeah, the recommendations are before you and here for questions.
Thank you for that report, Steve. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, the motion would read the report PS -10/23 regarding RFP 2301. Port Burwell East Beach and Port Burwell Community Park Washroom Maintenance Award be received for information. And that council award RFP 23-01 to Agatha Cleaning Services for 2023 to 2027 in the amount of $1,000 plus HST weekly for a 22-week period for the Port Burble East Beach and Port Burble Community Park washroom maintenance for council's consideration. And that the appropriate authorizing bylaw be brought forward for council's consideration. Do you want it written that way? I don't think you do. I'll vote for council approval.
What you can do is you can just take council, for council consideration as a second line there. Yes.
I would think so. I vote.
So
I think so.
be brought forward.
No. Just strike for council considerations off the second line, whereas, or the and, whatever.
Yeah, first and that. It's the award and then the authorizing bylaw comes forward.
There it is. All right. Having amended that. Is anyone interested in moving and seconding that? Deputy Mayor Weiser will move, Councilor Chilcott will second, all in favor? That's carried. Item B. Report PS-11/23 by Steve Adams, Manager of Public Works, Drainage Superintendent regarding the bulk item curbside pickup spring update.
Yes, if council recalls, in the October 6th council meeting, a 2-month update was presented. And council give staff direction to move on to a 3-month spring trial. And this brings us to today. With this, the program has been very successful from what I've gotten from the public. Along with the contractor that's been picking up, I've asked many questions to many different people. And so far, it's been pretty good with no complaints. Within the report, you can see our last month of May here, we had quite a spike in the amount of garbage. I do believe as the program picks up, we're gonna continue to see a small rise, obviously with spring months being the busy month. Notably that May month, we had a number of residents that bought more than one tag, I guess, one pickup. So that actually worked out quite well. However, it did create a large number in our large quantity, a lot larger quantity than previous months. So as you see, pretty much after a 6-month trial, we kind of averaged it out at each pickup's an average of 0.13 metric ton. And timing of the trucks, the cost, a lot of this cost is truck time. So that averages out just around 14 minutes per stop. So moving forward with the program, we can use these numbers to kind of see where we're heading in that direction. However, that time pickup will decrease with more pickups. So however, moving on through this program, I know I touched a little bit on administrative staff time, and it was run very smoothly in the office. We did note that there's a little bit of a barrier between the e-transfers and the information given. So the administrative time from when it was originally presented is definitely a lot more, just due to follow-up calls. So moving forward, if council wishes, I think it's a little bit on staff to promote that a little bit better on how to positively speed that process up. However, with the program, revenue numbers compared to expenditures on the amount of garbage and the curbside pickup time did show a difference of 6,471 as a service fee, I guess, in the total what the municipality paid with the program and the municipal reserves. So looking in total, currently we're at $15 per pickup. Looks like our break even at this point is $45. Obviously, within this, staff is recommending to push that further so we don't not digging deeper into our reserves with this. However, this is council's decision in the end. And staff are willing to work with whatever council wishes. And on that, staff did recommend a 5-month. The winter months actually went quite well. However, talking and we left out a couple of the summer months just with staff time, office time in the with staff. So there's a little bit more implementing. So with that, I'll leave that with you. I'm here for questioning. Staff is looking for direction on moving forward with the program and possibly putting a number per pickup.
Thank you for the report, Steve. Any questions? Councilor Chilcott.
Thank you. Just curious, I noticed in the report that you mentioned that the time spent by staff picking up garbage that's been dumped has reduced drastically. Would you be able to give any kind of a average of what that would cost? Like, how much did it save having that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Dealing with for us, it's not the cost, it's a staff time. As you know,
cost?
projects are a big thing for our public works department. So the service calls for picking up garbage, unfortunately, it's not a high priority on our list. However, it's a very demanding when the garbage isn't getting picked up. Obviously, it's a burden on office staff as well, because those service calls continue to come in. And I know I touched base on, this program. It's working. I do think it's working. I give kudos because there's still groups out there that are walking the roads and picking up garbage. I've seen them, and definitely, municipality is glad to have them. So an actual dollar value, I think, is time. Each call out is a machine time, usually a truck time, which is 2 operators an hour per call, depending where they're going in the municipality. So
So
We're in-
minimum $40 an hour.
minimum $150 an hour.
Okay, so, and you said 12, less than a quarter, right?
Yeah, we,
12 or so?
that's right. We've dramatically changed.
What was it
Just
before?
thinking with
We-
the reduction in cost of time,
Mhm.
that maybe we could apply some of that to the cost of the
That's right.
pickup to bring it down to like a $40 even cost or something along that line,
Mhm.
so that we're sharing the benefits.
Well, if I did the math, you're suggesting that roughly saving upwards of $2,000 a year.
Right.
Staff time and machine time by having this program in place at $15 a unit.
That's right.
The question before council to consider is what's the tipping point that you're going to encourage people back to bad behavior?
Right.
Exactly.
So
Mhm.
where do we go? Now, you're suggesting if we even say the cost of not having not having a program here is gonna be or 1,200, or excuse me, 2,000, 2,500 bucks a year for you taking stuff out of the ditch.
That's right.
Whereas right now it's costing $6,400 to $15. So what do we do?
Well-
Double it and go to $30 a unit?
I think we're also forgetting one other thing is that how much of that stuff would have been burnt in the backyard.
Yeah.
Right? And there's the air quality issues and everything as we've seen, because, in the past, I would have burnt the stuff that I pick up, but I don't have a burn pile anymore. Right? So, like some things I don't think we need to make money on. We can stop the bleeding a bit, but like that stuff ends up someplace.
Yeah.
Right? So like, I don't know, like if you're like, I think if it was like $25, it'd be, because I think the tipping point's not as high as you think it would be before a guy will just drive his pickup truck out and dump it on your dead end. Usually my road, I've had 0 this year up there by the bridge. That used to be commonplace. 0 this year.
All right.
So far, I shouldn't say it out loud because maybe tomorrow there will be one. And I clean quite a few of them myself, right? So.
Deputy Mayor?
Yes, thank you through you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Steve, for the report, and I am very encouraged with seeing the report, and the positive feedback has been phenomenal, but I have to say that I'm sitting around the same figure as Mr. Councillor Emerson. in the sense that I'd like to see it around the $25 mark. And perhaps I could propose that we do that for another year, just so we have an opportunity to advertise again, and we have a new website coming, and it'd be good to have some of this stuff going out a little more regularly, just to increase awareness. So I think we're seeing that it's starting to gain traction, but I think we have an opportunity to do a little bit more on the admin side for advertising. So if we could keep it at a lesser cost for another year and then maybe reevaluate in the budget coming forward, I would be very supportive of that.
Any additional comments?
Well, I think if we run this through you, Mr. Mayor, at least another year, a lot of that stuff is one-time stuff, you'd think, more or less, but
Every year.
well, I don't know, what's the lifetime on a mattress? Like, there's a lot of mattresses picked up.
Through Mr. Mayor, absolutely. I think, we lose some, we gain some on that motion, but with changes and contract changes in the large waste and our, yearly things, it's not a bad idea, for staff to bring forward, because prices could inflate, truck time, things have to keep moving one way or the other. So keeping council updated on this isn't a bad thing. So.
Steve, is the contractor amenable to a 5-month pickup schedule?
Yeah, through you. Absolutely. They're more than happy. They're at the point too with staffing issues, so. But I've talked to him about it, and whatever we throw at them, they'll make it work. So that's not an issue.
Thomas?
Just one question for council to consider before we get to any recommendation. And council should consider whether we're making this permanent tonight or whether we're going to go with an extended trial for another 12 months.
It's a very good question. Even if it's permanent, we can still amend the price.
That's correct. The only reason I bring that up is because the recommendation before council generally is to establish this as a permanent program. And if I understand from the deputy mayor, she's interested in another 12 months of trial information before making it permanent, leveraging additional communication. So I'm just looking for clarification on that point because I may have to tweak the motion.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. Perhaps clarity would be from my perspective, or my thought process for this would be a permanent program, but a 12-month pricing of keeping the cost down a little bit. I would support a $25 fee and then reevaluating the costing to it in a year.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we're leading by example with this program, I think, and the municipality be cleaner in general for the existence.
Okay, I think that's the general consensus. What do we got?
Mr. Mayor, just I will, when I read the motion, I'm going to clarify that since we are halfway through 2023, we're only going to have 2 more pickup months for the rest of the year. So we've broken the motion up to 2023 and then 2024 and onward. And that to make this consistent with some of our other programs like the tree program and the bench program, we are looking to bring back a policy to establish this as a permanent program, and we'll do that in the summer. So with that said, the recommendation would be that report PS 1123 regarding bulk item curbside pickup spring update be received for information. And that for the remainder of 2023, the bulk item curbside pickup program shall operate during September and October. And that commencing in 2024, the bulk item curbside pickup program shall operate for the following 5 months within a given calendar year: April, May, July, September, and October. That council establishes a $25 user fee for the bulk item curbside pickup program effective September 2023 with costs to be, or with user fee to be reevaluated in June of 2024. And that a bulk item curbside pickup program policy be brought forward for council's consideration in August of 2023.
Mover and seconder. We'll take, Councilor Emerson will move, Deputy Mayor Weiser will second, all in favor? That's carried. Thank you for that. Section 12, Development Services, Sustainability and Conservation, 12.2, reports to council. We have report DS-36/23 by Margaret Underhill, Planning Coordinator, Deputy Clerk, regarding consent application E40-23 Bonneville Farmland, 55314 Jackson Line. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, your worship and council. I will just give Mr. Selden a couple minutes here.
Thanks, Margaret.
You're welcome. Thank you, your worship. So the report before you is to consider consent application E40-23 Bonnyfield Farmland, Ontario 4th Inc. They are proposing to sever a farm dwelling deemed surplus to the Bonnyfield farm operation. The planner's memo that's attached to the report analyzes the application subject to the Elgin County OP, the municipality of Bayham OP, and our zoning bylaw. As per the provincial and municipal policies for surplus farm dwellings, rezoning is required to rezone the retained lands to prohibit new dwellings and rezone the severed parcel. Subject to council's decision regarding the oversized barn that is part of the application or part of the severed parcel, I should say. Site-specific zoning to acknowledge the size of the barn and to prohibit the keeping of livestock on the severed parcel may be required. Standard conditions include civic numbering, signage for the retained, survey, planning report fee. The subject land is within the watershed of the Arn Municipal Drain, requiring a reassessment of the maintenance schedule to adjust for the severed parcel. Staff and planner recommend the support of the consent application for the surplus farm dwelling with the recommended conditions contained within the report. And I'm here for questions, your worship.
Thank you for your report, Mark. Does anyone have any questions at this point? Deputy Mayor Weiser.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. Just one question. The one letter reads that they want to remove the barn, but then in the agreement, it says they want to fix the barn up. I'm just not, is that going to affect the application in any way? Removal versus fixing up?
There's two different barns.
Ah,
There's one that is intended to be removed from the retained. But the proposal is to retain the barn to the northeast of the dwelling. Where the jog of the lot line is shown, that's the barn they wish to retain.
that makes much more sense.
So the line is gonna be redrawn.
No, the parcel they're proposing is like an L-shaped parcel,
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
upside down, kind of our L parcel. So
Couldn't figure out.
That wants to be retained with.
the metal clad barn.
Yeah.
In the northeast corner of the to be severed is what they want to retain. There's a metal clad shed shown on the drawing to be demolished just outside of the proposed severed lot in the northwest corner or northwest area. And they're keeping a metal clad garage as well, a small garage just to the north of the house. Okay,
Thank you very much for that clarification. I read that 4 times and still.
it's okay. So really, it comes down to the consideration if council supports them including that metal clad barn in the severed parcel or not. Because we do have policies in our official plan that do speak to The severed lot with the surplus dwelling shall be no larger than is necessary to support a private sanitary sewage treatment and potable water supply. Also, they have to meet MDS, but further to the point, they do rezone it we have to rezone it to a rural residential zone. Also, the severed lot with the surplus dwelling may include accessory buildings and structures if, in the opinion of municipal council, a land use conflict will not be created. And can include accessory buildings and structures where the property has been rezoned to prohibit the keeping of livestock. So it comes down to what they've proposed is to retain this, what would be considered an oversized accessory building on a rural residential lot. Bigger than what would normally be permitted on a rural residential lot.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you through you, Mr. Mayor. So, but however, I'm to understand that what's being severed, the current owners have no interest in that barn though, correct?
Correct.
So,
Through your worship, the interest for the barn is to go with the dwelling,
with the dwelling.
to use for personal storage, personal workshop, whatever the case may be, but they wish to keep it because it is of a size that could be beneficial for personal storage of, let's say, larger items, perhaps trailers, boats, that kind of item. So they wish to keep it.
Yes, Councilor Chilcott. I'm rather confused because I know who the purchaser is, but I'm trying to figure out why they want to separate.
I'm just curious, is the barn that you want to keep, or they want to keep, is it larger than any that we've approved in the past?
Yes, through your worship, it would be. And it'd be larger than what we would normally permit through the zoning bylaw to be constructed on a rural residential lot.
It's not like the frontage is bigger.
No, the frontage won't be big, but it's an oversized lot, well, what is normally allowed. That's the question. Keep in mind, we're a accommodating agency. That individual will make a decision.
I don't see an issue if he was gonna build it. I can't see destroying a perfectly functional building. So I don't have an issue with it.
Providing it's rezoned to minimize,
Yeah.
land use conflicts. Any other questions? You ready for the question? Motion to read the report DS 36/23 regarding the consent application E40 23 Bonneville Farm, Ontario 4 Inc. be received. And that council recommends to the Elgin County Land Division Committee that consent application E40 23 be granted subject to the following conditions and considerations. 1, the owner obtained zoning bylaw amendment approval to change the zoning of the retained lands from an agricultural A1A zone to a special agricultural A2 zone to prohibit new dwellings. 2, the owner obtained zoning bylaw amendment approval to change the zoning of the severed lands from an agricultural A1A zone to a rural residential zone or a site-specific RR-XX zone to permit an oversized accessory building and the prohibition of the keeping of livestock in the retained barn. 3, that the applicant initiate and assume, if required, all engineering costs associated with the preparation of a revised assessment schedule for the Arn drain in accordance with the Drainage Act RSO 1990 as amended, with a deposit to be paid in full to the municipality prior to the condition being deemed fulfilled. If the deposit does not cover the cost of the revised assessment schedule, the applicant will be billed for any additional costs incurred. 4, purchase of a civic number sign for a retained parcel. 5, digital copy of the registered plan and survey. 6, final report fee payable to the municipality. Anyone interested in moving and seconding that? Councilor Emerson will move. Councilor Chilcott will second. All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Item B, report DS 37/23 by Margaret Underhill, Planning Coordinator, Deputy Clerk, regarding consent application E 46 through 49-23. Nezazon and Howlett, 46 Chapel Street. Mark?
Thank you, Your Worship. So this report before you is for consideration of 4 consent applications that were received from John Nezazon and Danielle Howlett to sever 4 lots on Chapel Street in Vienna. The planner's memo that is included with the report analyzes the application subject to the municipality of AMOP and zoning bylaw. The 4 proposed lots may be considered to be infilling in a settlement area. The planner's memorandum does note the fact that the proposed lot areas are substantially larger than the minimum lot areas for R1 parcels. If the lot sizes were made smaller, there is potential for more residential lots along this stretch. OP section 8.6.1.1 does state that the creation of lots may only be granted for up to 4 per parcel of land, exclusive of the retained. Further lots from the original parcel existing as of the date of the approval of the official plan shall be reviewed under a plan of subdivision or condominium process to assess, among other matters, the feasibility of municipal sewer and water services and the cumulative environmental impact of the development. One point to bring about is the servicing in that area. The water service on Chapel Street, as I've said in the report, there is a 6-inch water line that runs up to 26 Chapel, and it services 26 to 49. The houses beyond 49 to 65 come off of Chute Line. Based on staff and engineering discussions, staff cannot support additional development on the existing 2-inch line that runs between 26 and 49 Chapel, being the frontage along the subject lands. The existing 2-inch line is near maximum capacity for demand, having multiple houses already connected to that line. Any further development along that stretch of Chapel would put the volume requirement over available capacity of the line, potentially jeopardize any existing connections. The sanitary service on Chapel Street, the existing sanitary service line ends at 31 Chapel. An extension of the sanitary sewer line would be required for this 4-lot proposal. Options to consider regarding servicing are not to proceed with the development, as staff would not be able to support additional development on the existing 2-inch water line and without an extension of the sanitary sewer, or the developer enter into a development agreement with the municipality to construct and pay all the costs associated with upgrading to a 6-inch water line and the extension of the sanitary sewer line. I've put in here approximately frontage of 280. The lot layout frontage is actually 257 as proposed, but the design, depending on when the design or how the design comes in, there could be more or less of that distance that has to be considered to include all of the service. So I've estimated that it's approximately 280 meters. Any proposal for private or partial servicing would not be appropriate for this development, as it is within the boundaries of Vienna and necessitates full servicing for water and sewer. Staff also recommend the owner enter into a development agreement with the municipality to upgrade the public right-of-way lands along the entirety of the width and frontage of the proposed severed lots to current municipal standards, including but not limited to road widening, roadway surface widening, and ditch drainage works. This would be subject to the engineer's final design plans for the entire development. So again, we would look at how the engineering comes in to determine exactly what needs to be done at that point. Also include in the recommendation a condition for the development agreement for the installation of the municipal service at all costs associated with both installations is the responsibility of the developer. Developer has the responsibility to contract an engineer to design both services, assist with the required applications for service extensions to the MOEC or MECP, and assist with hiring of a qualified contractor to install. Additional conditions include engineered stormwater management, drainage grading, survey, cash in lieu payment, and planning report fee. The lots along Chapel would be subject to road access permits from the municipality, as it is a municipal street, and that would be at the time of building permit. It does appear as though the subject land is within the Chapel Street drain watershed, requiring a reassessment of the maintenance schedule to add the new lots. Staff and municipal planner do not fully agree with the larger lot sizes and the inefficient use of land. However, we do support the applications with the recommended conditions listed. And they are listed in the report for council's consideration. And I'll leave it with you, your worship, for questions.
Thank you, Mark, for that report. For the list of conditions. Does anyone have any questions? Deputy Mayor.
Yes, thank you through you, Mr. Mayor, to Margaret. Just a quick question. So again, I read it 4 times, but you never, I may not have got it. Only 4 lots allowed in that area in terms of growth, unless there's a subdivision agreement, or there's only 4 buildable lots, period.
Okay, through your worship to the deputy mayor, in our official plan, it is specified that you can go through the severance process up to 4 lots plus the retained. So in this case, it's 4 lots with the 1 retained lot. That's the max. Beyond that, you have to go into a plan of subdivision process.
Supplementary, yeah. So based on, if you're gonna expand water lines and sewer lines and pay for roads, would it not make sense to enter into a subdivision agreement so you can get more buildable lots?
Through your worship, that would be up to the landowner and the developer to determine whether it's cost effective to do 4 or more cost effective to do it as an entire plan of subdivision.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So is the plan to come before us again 2 years from now and ask for 4 more lots and skip the subdivision thing?
No room.
Through your worship, they are maxed out at 4.
Yeah. But what happens?
After that is plan of subdivision, regardless of change of ownership or change of boundary, they are maxed at 4, and then it's a plan of subdivision. Not just this property. I want to clarify too. We're not just saying this property. It goes for any property. You're maxed out at 4.
Create something in a settlement area that's max at 4.
Without a plan of subdivision, like Mark's saying.
Okay. So the retained land is just gonna be wasted then. That's all.
Through your worship, we're not saying it'd be wasted. We're saying any further development would have to be through a plan of
Oh.
subdivision.
That's.
Yeah.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you through you, Mr. Mayor. Do we know if the applicants have an engineer that they're working with that would be possibly providing them with some advice? Because it would be such a shame for them to go forward on 4 oversized lots if it makes more sense for them to, especially once you get costing involved here, that this is a lot of money to expand water lines and sewer lines and.
Through your worship, I will advise council that the owner is in the audience at this moment. John
Okay.
Nez is on.
Oh,
However, it's not a public meeting, so,
right.
okay, well, I'll address the question that I am aware that the landowner has contacted an engineer
Mhm.
and is working with an engineer on costing and design.
Okay. Thank you.
Any additional questions? Councilor Chilcott.
Thank you. So, sorry. He's working on this with an engineer to do the 4 lots and the costing for the roads and everything, not for subdivision. Is that what you're advising?
Through your worship, the landowner is working with an engineer presently to come up with a design for these 4 lots. That's what I'm aware of. And that means servicing, yes, with this report. And depending on the decision of Land Division Committee, what they include. But yes, an engineer would work on the servicing, the layout, road,
Mhm.
whatever is necessary to get those 4 lots.
So supplementary, so if this is passed, and then he gets all the information and they decide to go with smaller lots, he's not tied to this.
Through your worship, an applicant does have the option to amend their applications with the Land Division Committee if they choose to do so.
Thank you.
And then I'll just add to that, your worship, applications would come back to the municipality for consideration as amended applications.
Thank you.
I think the point being, it's a maximum of 4 lots outside of a plan of subdivision. Okay? Any additional questions? I'll leave the motion and see where we go. What Mark wants to.
Would you like me to?
Be it moved that report DS 37/23 regarding the consent application E46 4023 to E49 23. Nezazon and Howlett were received. And that the council recommend to the Elgin County Land Division Committee that consent applications E46 through 49 23 be granted, subject to the following conditions and considerations. Number 1, that the owner install, construct adequate extension of municipal water services and installation of a public fire hydrant to the proposed severed lots and enter into a development agreement with the municipality for such service extension. Number 2, that the owner install, construct adequate extension of municipal sanitary sewer services to the proposed severed lots and enter into a development agreement with the municipality for such service extension. Number 3, that the owner enter into a development agreement with the municipality to upgrade the public right-of-way lands along the entirety of the width and frontage of the proposed severed lots to current municipal standards, including, but not limited to, roadway surface widening and ditch drainage works. The extent of the upgrades will be determined subsequent to detailed review of the owner's professional design plans for the development and prior to the signing of the development agreement in consultation with the municipality and or municipal engineering consultants and the owner's professional engineering consultant. Number 4, that the owner provides stormwater management, drainage, and grading plans for the severed lot to the satisfaction of the municipality. Number 5, that the applicant initiate and assume, if required, all engineering costs associated with the preparation of a revised assessment schedule for the Chapel Street drain in accordance with the Drainage Act, RSO of 1990, as amended, with a deposit to be paid in full to the municipality prior to the condition being deemed fulfilled. If the deposit does not cover the cost of the revised assessment schedule, the applicant will be billed for any additional costs incurred. Number 6, that the owner obtain removal of a holding symbol zoning approval subsequent to entering into a development agreement with the municipality for any municipal servicing upgrades for the development. Number 7, that the owner pays, that the owner pay fees as required in municipal bylaw number 2020-053, cash in lieu of parkland. Number 8, that the owner provides a survey of the subject lands and include in the drawing package the requirements of the Planning Act, section 5117. Number 9, that the owner provides a planning report fee payable to the municipality of Bayham. And number 10, to satisfy the required road dedication of 20.0 meters minimum local road. This property is subject to a widening of 1/2 of the distance required to increase the Chapel Street ROW to 20.0 meters, 65.62 feet in width across the entirety of the lot frontage on Chapel Street. The extent of the road widening land shall be determined by the owner by way of providing a reference plan from a legal land surveyor confirming the extent of the road widening with all costs and applications associated with the transfer of the lands to the municipality to be the responsibility of the owner. A reference plan describing the widening to be transferred must be pre-approved by the municipality. Anyone willing to move that, or do you want me to read it again? Deputy Mayor Weiser will move, and Councillor Chilcutt will second. All in favor? That's carried. Item C, report DS 38/23 by Margaret Underhill, planning coordinator regarding subdivision agreement, Joe Lynn, Port Burwell, Inc. All right.
Thank you, your worship. So this report before you is to authorize the signing of a subdivision agreement between Joe Lynn Port Burwell Inc. and the municipality of Bayham to provide for the development in a plan of subdivision named the McNeil subdivision in the village of Port Burwell. The agreement was made as a condition of approval by the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing to be completed in 2 phases. The owner agreed with the municipality to comply with all the requirements with respect to the agreement. Schedule B of the original agreement being this estimated time limits listed the services to be provided along with the estimated timeline for construction as ending in the summer of 2017. Jolin Port Burwell Inc. was not able to complete both phases of the subdivision in the estimated timeline. They have substantial completion of the McNeil Court, which was the first phase, but now they are moving forward to phase 2, which is Charles Court. So now they are seeking approval to move forward, and it necessitates a new subdivision agreement. So staff have been working with Mr. McNeil and his engineers for several months, and they've been finalizing their plans to proceed with phase 2 of Charles Court. Included in the agreement, there's details pertaining to outstanding items from phase 1. They're not substantial, but there are items that need to be completed. Phase 2 has the municipal water and sanitary services installed previously. My report says preciously, but it should say previously. Just picked up on that. And we'll be proceeding with roadworks, drainage, et cetera, to complete the 14-lot subdivision that received approval in 2010. Mr. McNeil agrees to the contents of the agreement, and he looks forward to moving this forward quickly. One item of negotiation with Mr. McNeil was the cash in lieu of parkland fee, because at the time of the original agreement in 2010, the fee was $500 per lot. The subdivision did not advance within the agreed upon estimated timelines, and taking into account council passing a cash in lieu of parkland bylaw in 2020, and we increased it to $2,000 per lot, we had a discussion with Mr. McNeil that we could compromise to go to a $1,250 per lot, considering, yes, he's had an agreement since 2010, but he didn't quite meet all the requirements. But staff thought there could be a compromise here. So the subdivision agreement includes the $1,250, but of course, the entire agreement is up to council's consideration and discussion. So I will leave it with you, your worship, for any questions.
Thank you for the report, Mark. Does anyone have any questions? Been a long time coming on getting those properties developed down here. Any concerns? Hearing none, the motion would read the report DS-38/23 regarding the subdivision agreement Jolin Port Burwell Inc. be received. And that council authorized the execution of a subdivision agreement between the municipality and Jolin Port Burwell Inc. to permit the completion of phase 1 McNeil Court and development of phase 2 Charles Court, McNeil subdivision in Port Burwell, and that bylaw number 2023-054 be presented for an act. Do I have a mover and seconder? Councillor Chilcott will move. Councillor Emerson will second. All in favor? That's carried. Brings us to section 13, finance and administration, 13.1 correspondent, and 13.1 to receive for information. Item A. Lanark County regarding support for Bill C-321. Item B, Woodstock, Ingersoll, Tillsonburg Area Association of Realtors regarding the May 2023 report. Item C, Elgin County regarding the May 23rd, 2023 County Council highlights. Item D, the LPRCA regarding the May 3rd, 2023 Board of Directors meeting minutes. Anyone have any items of the correspondence they wish to bring attention to or ask questions on? Seeing none, the motion would read that items 13.1(1)(a) through D be received for information. Do I have a mover and seconder? Councillor Emerson will move. Deputy Mayor Weiser will second. All in favor? That's carried. 13.1.2 requiring action. Item A, the Stratford Community Committee request for storage on municipal property. Is that you, Madam Clerk?
Yes, it is, your worship. Thank you. The Stratfordville Community Committee submitted a letter of request to inquire about a storage container on municipal property. In conversations with them, this is mainly for items for the Watermelon Fest. that their previous location is not going to be available this year. So we talked with them about, is this temporary, permanent? Where would you like it? That sort of thing. So with their answer of wanting it to be permanent, we suggested on the grounds here at the office behind the barn. I think it's the barn behind Public Works barn. Speaking with them, and in the letter, it's supposed to be about 20 feet. So staff would think that this could happen if council is agreeable, and if you are agreeable, we would enter into an agreement with them.
Steve, they can access this around the playground equipment to get to that facility. They're talking about along the south side of the barn. I call it shed.
Mhm.
I call it barn.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. There is access. I haven't seen the container. That was my biggest concern. I did ask how big it was, I believe, because we can get our 20-foot or 16-foot trailer back behind there. So it's just the unload and offload. Obviously, a site visit might be.
20-foot container.
Yeah.
As long as it doesn't interfere with the playground equipment,
It'll tuck in. I did measure it out there, like really you won't actually even see it unless you're at the playground because it'll actually hide behind the shed.
is it like,
I don't think they actually have it yet before they just wanted to ensure that we had approval.
I just think they want a good match of the building.
So that's a valid question, Mr. Mayor, because you
Mhm.
can buy them any color. It might be the ugliest container you ever saw. Right? And we're really not supposed to have containers in settlement areas. Right? And so are we starting a trend?
Oh, good point. What's the zoning on our park is? Park? Is it a permitted use?
We have a section in our zoning bylaw that speaks to no secans on residential properties.
Okay, but this isn't residential.
Correct.
Can we specify the color or quantity or whatever? Because I mean, it could be an old resident.
If they give.
Cox handwritten on the side or something.
Agreed. Given the hour, I was being a little flippant here, but no, if it would be nice with matching with facilities and blend in, and that way, you know, it wouldn't raise attention. That's what I was getting.
Through a supplementary, because I think there is a fellow in Oxford County that refurbishes containers and stuff and kind of dresses them up nicer.
First of all, I think we need to decide whether we're even willing to entertain this. I don't think it violates planning principle. They do need a spot to store things. Councillor Chilcott.
I'd be happy to move that. I believe that they do a lot for our community and they bring a lot of people into the community to support businesses and that, so I would support that in a nicely designed.
What's the difference in
Aesthetically
cost
pleasing.
between a portable structure and a container, like something that's actually a storage?
Probably cheaper to get the much cheaper.
Mhm.
Shall I read the motion? All right. That the correspondence from the community or Stratford Community Committee regarding a request for storage on municipal property be received for information. And that the request from the Stratford Community Committee regarding the request for storage on municipal property be approved. And that the appropriate authorizing bylaw to enter into an agreement for use of municipal property for storage purposes be brought forward for council's consideration. And Councillor Chilcott was willing to move that. I think Deputy Mayor Weiser was willing to second it.
Can we put a condition in? Subject to staff approval of what it looks like or something?
Are you moving to amend the motion before we even call it?
Through you, we can formally add it in the motion, or I can include language in the agreement. That it would be aesthetically pleasing.
I would support that. Can you do that without us formally changing the motion? You're willing to put that in,
Yes.
consider direction? Good enough. All right. All right, having heard that, all in favor? That's carried. Thank you. I know we're getting a little punchy. We've been here since 5:30. Okay. 13.2, reports to council. Item A, report TR 1223 by Lauren James, treasurer, regarding the PSAB 3450 financial reporting impacts and investments. You're still with us, Laura.
Good evening, your worship, members of council. I'm still here. This is gonna be a dry report, so I'm sorry if you fall asleep from accounting and beans and such like that, but I will try to sparingly and quickly do it. So, one of the new accounting changes this year impacting our financial statements from the period of January 1st to December 31st, 2023 is PSAB 3450 financial reporting of how we handle our financial instruments. Rob Foster, our auditor, alluded to this in the May 18th presentation of our 2022 consolidated financial statements. Basically, the high level is we can no longer report our investments at cost. We have to report them at the actively traded or fair market value approach. In the situation with our current investment holdings with LAS, we've been reporting them at cost, where the fair market value has been substantially lower than our booked cost on our financial statements. What this creates is we have to record a unrealized or realized loss annually on our financial statements. Rather than recording this loss, staff have proposed that one, we sell off our LAS investments, repurpose them with high yielding GIC investments, which we have previously received from RBC financial institutions, and try to recoup some of those losses. And then moving forward, trying to reduce our exposure to having these unrealized losses booked on our year-end statements. These unrealized losses have the effect of reducing our year-end reserve numbers, both in rate user fee reserves like water, wastewater, as well as any tax-related reserve accounts as well. I'm available for questions or why PSAB 3450 is so great for BAM.
Well, thank you for that report. Does anyone have any questions for the treasurer? Personally, I look at the report and I understand the fact that even going this route, we're only recovering half of the realized loss. Still, it makes a good business sense to me that we should follow the advice.
Another thing for council consideration, the average municipalities last year with the LAS between the bond and the equity fund had an average loss of 8.5% to 11.5%, depending their weighting. So we're not the only municipality that's in this situation. We're one of the first ones in our local group that have aggressively moved forward on the changing of the accounting framework that impacts our financials. I would see in the coming months, you'll see other municipalities moving forward on adopting the framework, your worship and members of council, as well as also coming forward maybe with a revised investment policy as well.
All right, thank you for that, Lauren. 8.5 to 11, you say?
That was what I was quoted from Eleanor Schneider at LAS 2 weeks ago, that anywhere from, depending the weighting. Again, I remember, council, that some of the municipalities could have a higher weighting for equity versus bond, but between bond and equity holdings, the typical municipalities are seeing between 8 to 11.5% market drop from 21 to 22.
Yeah, realized 12.5.
Just a quick clarification, the unrealized losses noted in the report are from time of purchase, so they aren't specific to last year. I'm not sure if the treasurer has information on the unrealized loss attributed to 2022, but that is over the life of the investment. 2022 was sort of a rarity when equities and bonds were both down substantially, so that hit pretty well everybody that's invested in the one fund.
So
2022 would have about a 3.7 impact for us.
All right, you're looking at or recommending an 18-month non-redeemable GIC.
Well, that is correct, your worship. Council needs to be considered that there is substantial capital programs in play, i.e. one, the community center, i.e. both the water line improvements, the DMAF, as well as you have the less than a 24-month period till Ojibwe debt is renewal. We were going to be forced to be selling these investments sooner rather than later, your worship and members of council. This is an opportunity to try to find yield and reduce our loss over that duration.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you through you, Mr. Mayor. Just a quick question, Lauren, at the 18-month mark, do we reinvest? What happens then?
We'll likely be looking for a couple month investment before the March 2025 Ojibwe debt renewal comes up.
Okay. Councillor Chilcott.
Thank you. I was looking at the other interest rates, and you've got the 1 year is a little bit higher and 270 days is a little bit higher than that as well. Are there items that we would need to pull out during that period of time, or is it all required for 18 months and later? that we'd
So
have to be for?
just to bring council up to speed, we have not withdrawn the LAS investment fund since the inception of having the fund. So the municipality has been able to financially sustain themselves without having to pull these investments. And council also remember that we did a round of investments last July, August. We did another round in the fall. We did another round in January, and then we just recently did another round in April. All those are on a 1 year renewal. So if in the event that the municipality needs cash flows for a shovel-ready project or other, you also have those GICs which will have renewal dates coming up.
Okay, thank you.
And just to follow the treasurer's point, the first round of those GICs was invested last summer. It comes for maturity next month. So we will start to be, seeing some of that cash recycle at this point in
Okay, I
time.
was just worried about locking everything in for that period of time and not being able to remove some.
Any other questions?
Good.
Motion reads a report TR 12-/23 regarding PSAB 3450 financial reporting impacts and investments being received for information. And that staff be directed to sell the entire LAS investment one fund portfolio. And that staff be directed to purchase 18-month GICs for all investment accounts from the LAS investment one fund portfolio. Do I have a mover and seconder? Deputy Mayor.
Your worship, the motion had an error on there.
Too late now. What is the error?
18 months should be invested with Royal Bank.
Doesn't say anything.
The
From the,
GICs.
instead of the,
It should
Direct
read,
purchase of 18 for all investment accounts from LAS investment one.
but then.
Okay. and then it should be added from Royal Bank, Royal Bank of Canada at GIC auctions.
Oh, yes,
Yeah,
missing,
Royal Bank of Canada.
because 18 months GICs for all investment accounts from,
Royal Bank of Canada.
says to purchase it from.
Mhm.
It should say purchase it from GICs from Royal Bank.
Appendix B and C were the rate options that
All right,
both,
number 3 is wrong. You're saying
Yeah.
directed to purchase 18-month GICs for all investment accounts from the RBC.
correct.
Language, please. RBC what?
RBC investments.
Thank you.
Investments. Got it.
Okay,
Good catch.
Got it.
thank you.
Good catch, Lauren.
Well, otherwise, we're just.
Doing the same,
Cir-
we're just circulating it right back in.
Your worship, the motion was left open in case council wanted to consider appendix B or C, which was attached.
Don't confuse us, Lauren. We're getting a little tired here.
I know, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I like you.
Okay,
I'm through you, Mr. Mayor. I'm still prepared to move it as it's written, or sorry, as it's amended.
thank you. And Mr. Chilcott, you're willing. Okay, staff have that figured out.
Have it.
All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Sorry, Lord, no disrespect intended. Report CAO 3623 by Thomas Sayer, CAO clerk, regarding contract extension amendment, tenant security group, third party bylaw enforcement services.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So we entered into a 6-month trial agreement with Tenet to provide third-party bylaw services earlier this year. Contract would have ended on June 30th, 2023. Since we are before that date, it is still active. As we are in the process of implementing shared services for bylaw enforcement with the Township of Malahide, we will be required to continue with third-party services until we determine what that level of service is and whether more bylaw staff is required. We're recommending a 6-month extension of this contract to provide for weekend and backup services as needed. And to include in that extension some formal language to include Malahide as well, as we will be the service provider. Interesting point of note is that the bylaw officer we are onboarding has worked with Tenet's primary bylaw enforcement officer in another role. We are hoping to leverage the synergy going forward. Recommendation is before you tonight to approve a 6-month extension. And we will be bringing an authorizing bylaw forward at the next meeting to formalize. I'll leave it with you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Just to confirm with staff that the cost regarding tenant is only upon utilization.
That is correct.
Was concerned.
So if we use them, we don't pay.
I was concerned we were
All right.
doubling down.
All right. Any other questions for staff on this? Again, the primary use of tenant, yeah. While we're onboarding our own bylaw enforcement officer, we'll also provide weekend parking enforcement, wherever, the beach, wherever. Okay. Perhaps assist with the overloading when they get here.
Just as a note, we have had them out at the beach in Port Burwell the past 2 weekends doing parking education.
Parking education.
When does that morph to tickets?
To be determined.
After they're educated. Okay, the motion reads the report CAO 3623 regarding contract extension amendment, tenant security group. Third-party bylaw enforcement services be received for information. And that council approve a 6-month extension to the agreement with tenant security group, third-party bylaw enforcement services. With additional language to incorporate service provision to the Township of Malahide in accordance with the shared services memorandum of understanding. And that the appropriate authorizing bylaw be brought forward for council's consideration. Do I have a mover and seconder for that? Councillor Chilcott will move. Councillor Emerson will second. All in favor? That's, thank you. Item C, report CAO 37/23 by Thomas Thayer, CO clerk, regarding shared services update.
Thank you once more, Mr. Mayor. So this is I guess a follow-up report to the previous. As council is aware, council entered into a memorandum of understanding for the shared service. We are now beginning to put the pieces in place and establish shared service for building and for bylaw services. So the report outlines each of the 3 functions, including planning. I'll quickly go over those for council's information. So as of July the 1st, Malahide will be taking over the formal administration and delivery of the building services for BAM. Our current CBO is Paul Hillenar, Deputy CBO is Chris Peck through a contract agreement with Hillenar Consulting. This agreement expires as of June 30th of this year. In accordance, Malahide CAO Scott Sutherland is recommended to be appointed as BAM CBO effective July the 1st. And to provide for inspections and backup building services, RSM and its employees are recommended to be appointed as building officials for these purposes. We did have a meeting, would have been last week. Yes, last week with Malahide's CAO, CBO, and treasurer. Present at this meeting were myself and BAM's treasurer. We discussed some service levels, trends, and costs for both municipalities. And at the time, it was concluded and agreed upon that Malahide would look at hiring a shared building inspector as well. This would increase service levels to both municipalities and added reduced cost when compared with retaining both previous third-party code agencies. So BAM's agreement with Hillenar Consulting will expire on June 30th and will not be renewed. A bylaw will be needed to obviously do the appointment. And Mr. Hillenar was provided notice and a note of sincere appreciation from both Malahide and BAM for his service over the last number of months. We will also, to support the transition, be looking at implementing an e-permitting software called Cloud Permit. Cloud Permit is utilized by a number of municipalities around Ontario, including Malahide. And this will streamline permit intake, notes and records, and inspection scheduling. Particularly as this will be happening over 2 municipalities, we have to be able to leverage technology to reduce staff time and burden. So we were hopeful to implement that in the short term. The report does note an estimated cost of $8,000 when looking at this license. I did have a meeting with Cloud Permit this morning, and the actual license costs are $10,000. There is a $2,000 one-time implementation fee as well. As a recommendation as well in this report, I'm requesting council consider providing me delegated authority for negotiation and to enter into a contract with Cloud Permit for these services, as our next council meeting is not scheduled for approximately 5 weeks. Overall, it's expected that shared building service, based upon our estimates, service levels and trends, will provide us with an extra 100 hours of additional service per year, while saving us approximately 10 to 20% on building department costs. So we are very much looking forward to getting this in place and seeing how everything functions. With respect to bylaw enforcement, as of July the 1st, BAM will undertake formal bylaw service provision for the township of Malahide. This is done through a formal bylaw enforcement officer onboarding within the BAM's organizational structure, along with third-party support through Tenet. So we have successfully completed the process for a bylaw enforcement officer, and we have a bylaw tonight to appoint. Bylaw and building amongst other positions. Mr. Stephen Miller will be assuming his role with the municipality on July the 10th. He comes to us with 15 plus years of bylaw enforcement experience, including the last 11, I believe, from the city of London. So we're very lucky to have him coming on board. So once on board, it's expected that he will be reviewing both municipalities' policies and programs for bylaw enforcement, while commencing primary enforcement on new and ongoing files, in concert with assigning files for Tenet as well. We are very much looking forward to leveraging his experience. At this time for planning, I can advise that Malahide has conducted a second advertisement for the Director of Development Services position. This director, once onboarded, will be available to both Malahide and BAM, to BAM as a contractor in particular, for purposes of plans, review, and recommendations to council, and coordination of any third-party planning support. This will provide us with a registered professional planner, should they be onboarded. Within the vicinity, as council is aware, we have been utilizing IBI for the vast majority of the planning applications that BAM has considered. And the primary consultant through IBI, Mr. Paul Riley, is currently residing in Nova Scotia, so he is not local. This provides us with a local resource. So at the drafting of this report, the advertisement is closed, and we are proceeding through the recruitment process. Hopefully more information shortly. But Mr. Mayor, I will leave that with you. Recommendation to bring forward the appropriate appointment bylaw, and to delegate authority to the CAO to negotiate and enter into agreement for Cloud Permit. I'll leave it with you.
Thank you for that report. Anyone have any questions? A lot of moving pieces coming together pretty quickly. All right. Motion to read the report CAO 37/23 regarding shared services update to receive for information, and that the appropriate appointment bylaw be brought forward for council's consideration, and that council delegate authority to the chief administrative officer to negotiate and enter into a service agreement with Cloud Permit on behalf of the municipality for implementation and use of Cloud Permit software. We have a mover and second. Councilor Chilcott will move. Councilor Emerson will second. All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Brings us to the bylaws. Getting close to the end now. Bylaw A, bylaw number 2023-049. Being a bylaw to amend 2021-073, bylaw to authorize execution of agreement, consulting agreement between the Corporation of Municipality BAM and A-Link Architecture. Item B, bylaw number 2023-050, bylaw to authorize the execution of an agreement between the Corporation of Municipality of BAM and Rail Tech Enterprises, Inc. for the Vienna Community Park Pavilion Works. Bylaw number 2023-051 being a bylaw to authorize execution of an agreement between the Corporation of Municipality of Bayham and Realtech Enterprises, Inc. for the Port Burwell Library Pavilion Works. Bylaw number 2023-052 being a bylaw to authorize execution of an agreement between the Corporation of Municipality of Bayham and Agnes Cleaning Services provision of washroom maintenance services. Bylaw number 2023-053 being a bylaw to appoint municipal officers and employees for the municipality of Bayham. And bylaw number 2023-054 being a bylaw to authorize the signing of a subdivision agreement between Jolin Port Burwell Inc. and the Corporation of Municipality of Bayham. Does anyone have any questions or concerns regarding these bylaws? Hearing none. The motion would read that bylaw numbers 2023-049, 2023-050, 2023-051, 2023-052, 2023-053, and 2023-054 be read a first, second, and third time and finally passed. Deputy Mayor Weiser will move and Councillor Chilcott will second. All in favor? It's carried. Section 17, the confirming bylaw. A confirming bylaw number 2023-055 be read a first, second, and third time and finally passed. I need a mover and seconder. Councillor Emerson. And Councillor Chilcott. All in favor? Which brings us to the long anticipated adjournment motion. That the council meeting be adjourned at 9:37 p.m. Mover and seconder. Councillor Emerson. Thought off the track and Councillor Chilcott. Brought up the second. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you for joining us this evening. It's been a long one, but we got through it. And thanks for taking an interest in local governance.